The clinking sound of coffee mugs and the soft hum of the jukebox filled the quiet morning air inside the truck stop cafe. Liz Monroe wiped down the counter, her steady hand moving in rhythmic circles. She had worked this job for years, ever since leaving the military. There was something soothing about the routine. Get up, make coffee, serve truckers, and keep to herself. It was the closest thing to peace she had found since returning from overseas. But peace wasn't always guaranteed. The door swung open with a loud creak, and Liz's eyes flicked up, narrowing instinctively. A group of bikers walked in, their leather jackets glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. The scent of gasoline and cigarette smoke followed them in. Liz couldn't help but let out a silent sigh. It wasn't unusual to see bikers come through. They were a fixture in the truck stop's steady flow of travelers. But these men, with their patchwork jackets and swaggering steps, looked different. They had that air about them, loud, proud, and full of trouble. One of them, the largest of the group, scanned the room with a sneer. His eyes met Liz's, and a grin spread across his face. Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice thick with arrogance. "A woman running the show? I thought this place was supposed to be for real truckers." His gang chuckled behind him, a few of them exchanging knowing glances. Liz held his gaze, unblinking. She had dealt with her fair share of trouble over the years, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by some biker gang who thought they could walk all over her. "I'm the owner, and if you need anything, just let me know," Liz replied coolly, her voice steady. She could already tell that this wasn't going to be a casual stop for them. These guys weren't here just for food. They were here to make a statement. The big one, clearly the leader, sauntered over to the counter, leaning in close. His breath smelled like stale whiskey and cheap cigars. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, leaning on the counter, his eyes lingering a little too long. "Liz," she replied curtly, "and I'm not your sweetheart." The leader chuckled darkly, clearly amused by her bluntness. He slapped a crumpled dollar bill on the counter. "Let's see what you've got to offer, Liz. We're hungry." Liz didn't flinch, taking the money and turning to make his order. She could feel their eyes on her as she moved, their stares sharp and uncomfortable, but she wasn't going to let them get to her. She had learned the hard way to stand her ground, especially when it came to bullies. As she prepared their meal, she could hear their murmurs, the occasional burst of laughter as they exchanged jokes at her expense. They were making it clear that they thought she was just another weak woman behind the counter, someone who could be pushed around. When Liz placed the food in front of the leader, his eyes tracked her every move, a challenging smirk never leaving his face. He didn't touch the plate at first, just stared at her with that cocky expression. "You know," he said, leaning back, "you don't look like the type who can handle this kind of crowd. You sure you know what you're doing here, Liz?" She straightened, meeting his gaze head-on. "I've handled worse than you." The room fell silent. Even the other bikers seemed to hold their breath, watching the exchange between Liz and their leader. Liz's heart rate picked up, but her expression didn't change. She had fought in places far worse than this cafe, against enemies who wouldn't think twice about taking her life. These bikers were nothing more than an inconvenience. She had a lifetime of experience backing her up. The leader studied her for a moment longer, then laughed, a loud, boisterous sound that echoed in the small cafe. "You're a tough one," he said, tipping his head back. "All right, I'll give you that. But we'll see how long that lasts." Liz didn't respond. She just turned and walked back to the counter, her mind already moving on. But she could feel the eyes of the bikers on her, and she knew it wasn't going to end there. They weren't the kind of men to let things go easily. As she wiped down the counter, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She had survived wars, but this was a different kind of fight, and it looked like she was about to be forced into it. What would you do if you were Liz? Would you stand your ground like she did, or would you try to avoid the confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Liz leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on the rag as her thoughts drifted back to the past. The days before she found herself managing this truck stop. The mornings were quieter back then, filled with the hum of military radios, the distant thrum of engines, and the ever-present tension that came with being on edge. But those days were long gone. She had always been a fighter, even as a little girl in the small town of East Ridge, Arkansas. Growing up, her father, an army vet, instilled in her the belief that strength was everything. "You can't show weakness, Liz," he'd tell her, his voice low and gruff, like the rumble of a distant thunderstorm. "Out there in the world, if you do, they'll run over you. You stand tall, or you get crushed." She had learned the hard way that he wasn't wrong. As a teenager, she had struggled with finding her place. The boys in her school teased her for being too tough, for being too much of a tomboy. Her father, though, was proud. He had raised her to be capable, and when she turned 18, she made the decision that would shape the rest of her life. She enlisted. The military wasn't just a choice, it was a calling. She thrived in the structured environment, where everything had a purpose and everyone had a role. Liz was no stranger to discipline and determination. In fact, it was all she had known. Boot camp had been grueling, but it felt like home. And as she advanced through the ranks, her leadership skills began to shine. She earned respect through grit, not charm. It wasn't the easiest road, but it was hers. But the war was what changed everything. Liz had seen things, done things, that no person should ever have to. She had fought in places where the ground was scarred by years of conflict, and the faces around her were sometimes as lost as the country itself. It was a different kind of battle, the kind that didn't end when the mission was over, the kind that didn't end at all. In combat, she had been part of a special unit, one that was often sent in for covert missions. The adrenaline, the constant threat of danger, and the bond with her teammates had kept her going. But it also took its toll. They say you can never truly prepare for the loss of comrades in arms. But Liz hadn't just lost friends. She had lost pieces of herself along the way. There was one mission in particular that had haunted her the most, a covert operation that had gone horribly wrong. They were supposed to infiltrate a heavily guarded compound, but things went south. What was meant to be a precision operation turned into an all-out firefight. The men who had been with her, the ones she trusted with her life, didn't make it out. And though she had escaped with her life, the weight of their deaths clung to her like a second skin. The nightmares had started shortly after. Visions of their faces, their voices, their final moments. Liz tried to outrun it all. She tried to drown the memories with whiskey and work, but the past wouldn't let go. When she came home, the welcome she received was lukewarm at best. The world had moved on, and Liz found herself out of place in civilian life. She was a soldier without a war. Her old friends, the ones who had been with her in the field, were scattered across the country, fighting their own battles. Many of them, like her, were struggling to adjust. But they couldn't help her find her footing, not when they were all dealing with their own ghosts. The one thing that had kept Liz from spiraling further into the dark was her commitment to the cafe. She didn't want it to be just a place to pass time. She wanted it to be something she could hold on to, something that didn't remind her of the violence, the loss, or the chaos of war. It had taken years to build, and she'd poured her heart and soul into it. Still, there were days when the weight of everything she had seen and done pressed down on her, and those moments, those dark moments, were the hardest to push away. She had learned to smile, to joke, to laugh with her customers, but the truth was, the scars she carried, both physical and emotional, were never far behind. But she pushed through, kept the place running, and kept herself busy. She had to, because if she didn't, there was nothing left to keep her grounded. No matter how bad things got, the cafe was a constant. It was her way of holding on to something that felt real. Liz snapped back to the present, wiping away the stray tear that had slipped down her cheek. She hadn't meant to get lost in those thoughts, but sometimes they crept up on her without warning. Looking up, she saw that the bikers were still there, causing trouble. Ray, the leader, had a sly grin on his face as he looked her way. The past was always lurking in the background, waiting for a moment of weakness. But Liz was determined not to let it control her anymore. She wouldn't let them break her. Have you ever had to confront a past that won't let go? What steps did you take to move forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The cafe's small dining area was filled with the clattering of plates and cups as Liz moved from table to table, trying to ignore the stares of the biker gang still lingering by the counter. Ray, the leader, hadn't stopped making remarks, throwing them her way whenever their eyes met. At first, it was just small jabs about her running the place, about her being too tough for a woman. But with every passing minute, Liz could feel the weight of his gaze growing more intense, more threatening. It wasn't just the words. There was something about his presence. The way he looked at her made her skin crawl. Ray wasn't here for food, not really. She had been in enough high-pressure situations to know when someone was testing the limits, pushing boundaries to see how far they could go. And Ray? He was pushing. Liz took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the smooth edge of the counter as she tried to steady herself. She could feel her pulse in her temples, a sharp throb reminding her that this wasn't just a casual encounter. No, this was something else. This was a challenge. Her mind raced as she mentally reviewed her options. She had her concealed carry license, hadn't needed to use it yet, but she wasn't afraid of getting physical if things came to that. Still, she wasn't about to escalate things too quickly. Not in her cafe. Not with innocent people around. She could handle herself, but she wasn't sure how far Ray and his gang were willing to go. "Hey, Liz," Ray called from the counter, his voice breaking her thoughts. "Got any more of that hot coffee you were making? Or are you too busy to serve someone who's actually paying?" His voice was sharp, laced with a mocking tone. Liz stood straight, forcing a neutral expression. "I'm busy, but I'll get it for you," she said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as she reached for the coffee pot. She didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. She wasn't going to let him get to her. Not yet. As she poured the coffee, she felt Ray's eyes on her, watching every movement. The other bikers were quieter now, sitting in their chairs, but their silence only made the atmosphere heavier. Liz was used to confrontation, but this felt different. There was a strange sort of tension in the air, the kind you could cut with a knife. As she placed the coffee in front of Ray, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist unexpectedly. The grip was firm, too firm, and for a split second, Liz's heart skipped a beat. He was testing her. "You're a real tough woman, aren't you?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "But let me tell you something. You don't belong here. This place, this truck stop, doesn't belong to you." Liz's breath caught, her instincts kicking in. She didn't struggle, but she didn't let him hold her either. Slowly, with deliberate precision, she pulled her wrist from his grasp, meeting his eyes with cold defiance. "This cafe doesn't belong to anyone but me," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "And if you think you're going to intimidate me, you've got another thing coming." Ray smirked, clearly enjoying the game. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Liz," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You're not the first person who's tried to stand up to me. But let me tell you, sweetheart, you're not going to win this fight." Liz didn't back down. She had fought much harder battles, in much darker places, and this guy wasn't going to be the one to break her. But deep down, something nagged at her, a growing sense of unease. Ray wasn't just a drunk biker looking to cause trouble. There was something more behind his actions, something she couldn't quite put her finger on yet. Suddenly, the door swung open again, and Liz's attention snapped to it. The air shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, she thought the situation might de-escalate. But then she saw who had entered. Two more men walked in, both wearing the same leather jackets and patches as the rest of the group. But these men were different. They had an air about them, something colder, darker. Liz could feel it, the shift in energy. The first man, tall and broad-shouldered, walked straight up to the counter without a word. The second, shorter and wiry, scanned the room, his eyes landing on Liz. "Ray," the tall one said, his voice low but commanding, "we've got a problem. The guys from the east side are getting closer. We need to get moving." Ray's grin faded for just a moment, the tension in his shoulders tightening. It was as if the mention of the east side was enough to snap him out of his game. Liz caught the shift in his demeanor, his posture suddenly more rigid. Something was happening, and Liz could feel that her cafe had just become ground zero for something much bigger than she had expected. "I'll be there in a minute," Ray responded curtly, his eyes never leaving Liz's. "Just handling some business." The tall man nodded and turned to leave, the shorter one following behind him. Liz's mind raced, piecing together what she had heard. The east side? It sounded like something serious. Was Ray involved in something illegal? Was he here for a different reason than she had initially thought? Ray turned back to her, his smug grin returning. You've got no idea, do you, Liz? You're just a small part of a much bigger picture. Liz's gut tightened. She had a bad feeling about where this was headed. She needed to keep her head clear and her instincts sharp. Maybe so, she said, her tone steady. But I've handled bigger things than you before, Ray. And if you keep messing with me, you'll learn that real quick. The tension between them crackled, a silent challenge hanging in the air. Liz didn't know what this was really about, but she knew one thing. She wasn't about to let this group of bikers intimidate her or take her place away from her. She would fight, and if it came down to it, she'd fight dirty. What do you think Liz should do next? Should she confront the bikers head-on or find a way to outsmart them? Share your thoughts in the comments. The wind howled outside, its cold fingers creeping through the cracks in the truck stop's old wooden walls. It was the kind of wind that rattled the windows, shaking the dust from the shelves, reminding everyone inside that the storm was just beginning. Liz could feel it deep in her bones, the unease that had been slowly building since the bikers first rolled in. It was no longer just about a few bad customers causing trouble. No, something much darker was at play. Ray's cryptic words echoed in her mind. You're just a small part of a much bigger picture. Liz wasn't naive. She had lived long enough to know when things weren't what they seemed. And right now, everything about this situation felt wrong. The bikers weren't here for a good time. They weren't here just to get drunk and hit on the waitress. Something more was at stake, and it had nothing to do with a few cups of coffee. The door slammed open again, and Liz's attention snapped to it, her body tense. This time, it wasn't another biker entering. Instead, it was a familiar face, one that brought a sense of relief amidst the growing storm. Luke, Liz called out, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Her old friend, the sheriff of East Ridge, walked through the door with his usual calm confidence. His broad shoulders and sturdy frame were a welcome sight, especially given the feeling of danger hanging in the air. Luke had always been a steady presence in Liz's life. They had grown up together in East Ridge, and while Liz had left for the army, Luke had stayed behind, serving his small town as the sheriff. He was no stranger to the kind of trouble that could stir up in places like this, but his arrival brought Liz a sense of security she hadn't realized she needed. You okay, Liz? Luke asked, his eyes scanning the room, his hand hovering near the gun holstered at his side. Liz nodded, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. Just the usual, but I've got a feeling it's about to get worse. Luke raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed the group of bikers sitting at the counter, their attention fixed on Liz. Those your friends? He asked, his tone light but with an edge of seriousness. Liz couldn't help but chuckle, though it was more of a nervous laugh. Not exactly. Luke's gaze lingered on Ray for a moment, his expression unreadable. I've heard some rumors about that group, he said quietly, leaning in closer to Liz. They're not just bikers. They're involved in something a lot messier than that. Liz's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Luke leaned back, glancing at the group before meeting Liz's eyes. They're part of a larger operation. You've got one of the biggest illegal trafficking rings in the state operating right under your nose, and these guys? They're the muscle. Liz's blood ran cold. Illegal trafficking? She had heard whispers of such things, but she had never imagined it could be happening so close to her. So close to her cafe, the one place she had worked so hard to make her own. You think they're here to expand their operation? Liz asked, her voice low, barely a whisper. Luke nodded grimly. Most likely. And if that's the case, we've got a serious problem. These guys won't stop until they get what they want. Liz's thoughts raced. She had always prided herself on being able to handle whatever came her way. She wasn't afraid of confrontation, but this was different. This wasn't just some angry customer or a bar fight. This was organized, dangerous, and it had the potential to destroy everything she had worked for. What should we do? Liz asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. Luke gave her a hard look. We need to get you out of here. It's not safe. But Liz wasn't about to back down, not after everything she had been through. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. This is my place, Luke. I'm not running from these guys. I've got something they want, and I'll be damned if I let them take it. Luke stared at her for a moment, his face hardening with a mixture of concern and admiration. You've got guts, Liz. I'll give you that. But you're not alone in this. I'll get some backup. We'll figure this out together. But just as he finished speaking, the door creaked open again, and Liz's blood turned to ice. Ray stepped inside, flanked by two of his men, their leather jackets glinting in the dim light. The entire room seemed to tense in response, as if everyone knew the moment of truth was coming. Ray's eyes locked onto Liz's, his smile cruel and unsettling. I think it's time we talked, don't you, sweetheart? He said, his voice oozing with malice. Luke stood tall, stepping in front of Liz protectively. I think you've overstayed your welcome, Ray, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that could cut through steel. You're gonna leave, and you're gonna do it now. Ray didn't flinch. In fact, he looked amused. You think I'm scared of you, Sheriff? He took a step closer to Luke, his men following suit. I'm not going anywhere, not until I get what I came for. Liz's pulse quickened as she felt the tension rise in the room. Every muscle in her body was primed for action, ready to react. This wasn't just a fight for her cafe anymore. It was a fight for her life. Luke glanced at Liz, giving her a subtle nod. Get to the back. Now. But Liz didn't move. She wasn't going anywhere. No, she said, her voice steady. This is my fight too, Luke, and I'm not going to let them win. Ray chuckled, clearly underestimating Liz's resolve. Big talk for a little woman running a truck stop. You sure you're ready for this? Liz didn't blink. You're about to find out. The storm had officially begun. What do you think Liz should do next? Should she trust Luke to handle it? Or is this a fight she needs to take into her own hands? Let us know your thoughts. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe, like a storm about to crack the sky wide open. Liz's heartbeat echoed in her ears as Ray's men closed in around her and Sheriff Luke. Ray's smirk hadn't wavered, and that, more than anything, unsettled Liz. It wasn't the look of someone caught off guard. It was the look of a man who knew he was about to take what he wanted, regardless of who stood in his way. Luke, standing in front of Liz, was calm, too calm. His hand hovered over his holster, but he hadn't drawn his gun yet. Liz could feel the heat of his body beside her, a silent promise of protection, but she wasn't sure if that was enough. She wasn't sure if anything was enough. I told you, Sheriff, Ray said with a slow drawl, leaning forward. You've got no say in this. It's not your town, and it's not your cafe. His eyes shifted to Liz. This place, he paused, his voice turning dangerous. This place belongs to us now, whether you like it or not. Liz swallowed, her throat dry. She knew she had to act fast, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her, making her thoughts scatter. There was no going back now. She wasn't just fighting for her cafe anymore. She was fighting for her life, and Luke's life, too. I don't think you understand, Liz said, her voice steady, though a wave of uncertainty threatened to rise up inside her. She refused to show weakness in front of him. You came in here looking to cause trouble, and now you've found it. Ray chuckled darkly, his fingers twitching as he reached into the pocket of his leather jacket. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But in the end, it doesn't matter. I always get what I want. Liz's pulse surged, and in that split second, her instincts kicked in. She glanced at Luke, silently asking for permission. He caught her eye, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He didn't want to escalate things, but he also knew that if she wasn't going to back down, neither could he. Without taking her eyes off Ray, Liz edged closer to the counter, moving toward the back of the cafe. She wasn't backing down, but she needed a plan. Her fingers brushed against the heavy, cold coffee pot as she grabbed it, the ceramic smooth in her hand, solid and familiar. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Ray's gaze never left her. Don't even think about it, he warned. But Liz was already moving. In one swift motion, she turned and threw the coffee pot straight at Ray's face, the hot liquid splashing across his leather jacket and his shocked expression. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Ray staggered back, cursing under his breath, wiping the hot liquid from his face. The room was silent, too silent. Every pair of eyes in the cafe was on them now, holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. And that was when Liz felt it, the shift in the air. It was subtle at first, but then it exploded. "You're going to regret that, lady," Ray snarled, his voice a low growl. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the anger clear in his eyes. "But you won't get the chance. We'll make sure of it." Liz didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Ray's men stepped forward, their hands twitching toward their weapons. She could see it in their eyes. They were ready to escalate things. "Look, get down," Liz shouted, pushing the sheriff to the side as one of the bikers lunged at her. There was no time to think, no time to second-guess herself. Her military training kicked in. With a quick pivot, she grabbed a chair from behind the counter, swinging it around and smashing it into the biker's chest. The force of the blow knocked him back, but another biker was already on her, his hand reaching for her throat. In a blur of motion, Liz ducked low, using his momentum against him. She drove her elbow into his ribs, and as he staggered back, she kicked his knee out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Luke had drawn his gun now, but the situation was spiraling out of control. More bikers were advancing, their faces twisted with rage. Liz could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her muscles firing in rapid succession. She had fought in places darker than this, but the stakes had never felt higher. "You've got one last chance, Sheriff," Ray called out, his voice icy. "Get out of the way, and maybe I'll leave with my men. But if you don't, we'll burn this place to the ground." Liz's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was the point of no return. She couldn't let them have this place. She couldn't let them win. Before she could react, Ray lunged at her, his hand wrapping around her throat in a tight grip. The world went blurry for a moment as Liz's breath caught in her throat. She struggled, her fingers digging into his hand, trying to break free, but he was stronger. Luke didn't hesitate. He fired a shot into the air, the loud crack of the gun reverberating through the cafe, momentarily stunning everyone. "That's your last warning," Luke said, his voice deadly serious. "Leave. Now." For a moment, Ray's eyes flickered with uncertainty. Liz saw it, the crack in his resolve. It was all the opening she needed. In one swift motion, she twisted out of his grip and sent him stumbling backward with a powerful kick to his chest. Ray hit the ground hard, his men hesitating, unsure of what to do next. For the first time, Liz saw fear flicker in their eyes. "Get out," Liz said, her voice cold and unwavering. "Or I'll make you." The bikers exchanged glances, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Liz's defiance. Ray struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You've just signed your death warrant, lady." But for now, they left. They had no choice. As the door slammed shut behind them, Liz slumped against the counter, her body shaking with the aftermath of the adrenaline. Luke holstered his gun, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his hand on her shoulder. Liz nodded, though she knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. "What do you think is going to happen next? Is Liz in even more danger now that she's crossed the bikers? Or will this victory be enough to send them packing for good?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. The silence that followed the bikers' departure was deafening. The wind still howled outside, the storm not quite matching the one that had just erupted inside the cafe. Liz leaned against the counter, her breath ragged, her heart still pounding. Her fingers tingled with adrenaline, and she wiped the sweat from her forehead, trying to steady herself. She had done it. She had stood up to them. But the victory tasted bitter. Luke stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the damage. The chair Liz had used to fend off the biker now lay in pieces on the floor, and the smell of spilled coffee mixed with the tang of fear in the air. The cafe, which had once been a place of calm and community, now felt like a war zone. "You did good," Luke said, his voice low, though there was concern in his eyes. "You held your own." Liz nodded, but the weight of what had just happened was starting to sink in. "They'll be back, won't they?" Luke didn't answer right away, his gaze drifting toward the door, as if he could still see the bikers lingering outside. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice heavy. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. They don't take rejection lightly. Liz felt her stomach drop. She had seen the way Ray's eyes had narrowed when he left. That was no empty threat. The door creaked open again, making Liz stiffen instinctively. This time, it wasn't the bikers. It was one of the regulars, Tom, the trucker who always stopped in for coffee. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his weathered face looking between Liz and Luke. "You all right, Hon?" he asked, his voice gruff but kind. He had seen the bikers leave earlier, and the tension in the air was impossible to miss. Liz forced a smile. "Yeah, Tom. Just a little excitement." Luke gave Tom a sharp look, his hand still resting on the grip of his gun. "You see anything while you were out there?" Tom shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. "Not much. I saw them ride off, but I didn't want to stick around to see if they'd come back. Looked like you had things under control." Liz shot Luke a look. She had seen Tom around enough to know he wasn't the type to get involved in trouble, but now she wasn't sure if she could trust anyone to be on their side. The bikers had been clear. They wouldn't back down just because they'd lost a fight. "We need to lock up," Liz said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I don't care how quiet it is for the rest of the night. I want everyone out of here. It's not safe." Tom nodded and stepped back, reluctantly making his way toward the door. He didn't argue, which told Liz everything she needed to know about the seriousness of the situation. As the last of the truckers filed out and the door clicked shut behind them, Liz turned to Luke. "I don't know what to do. They'll come back with more people, and I can't let this place be a war zone." Luke leaned against the counter, his eyes searching her face. "I've been through my share of messes, Liz, and I know one thing for sure. If you want to keep this place safe, you're going to need more than a few good punches. You need help." Liz ran a hand through her hair, frustration building. "I don't have time to sit around and wait for backup. I need to be ready when they come back." Luke sighed and stood up straighter. "Maybe it's time to take things to the next level. We'll need to talk to some people who can help. People who know how to deal with guys like Ray." Liz's mind raced. The bikers weren't just a local nuisance. They were part of something bigger. Luke had hinted at it before, and now it was clear. The operation they were running was far-reaching and dangerous. Liz had already made the mistake of underestimating them once. She wasn't about to make that mistake again. "Who can we talk to?" Liz asked, her voice more determined now. Luke met her gaze. "There's a group in town. Ex-military. They run a few businesses, but they've got their fingers in all kinds of operations. I'll get in touch with them. They're the kind of people who don't back down when things get tough." Liz felt a surge of relief. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Luke had contacts, allies. But would they be enough to take on the bikers and their operation? "I'll get things set up," Luke said, his eyes narrowing with determination. "But you need to be ready. This is about to get a lot more dangerous than you think." Liz nodded. She wasn't going to let the bikers intimidate her. She had survived too much to back down now. The cafe was her home, and she'd be damned if she let anyone take it from her. As the night wore on, Liz worked in silence, locking the doors and preparing the cafe for the next day. But her mind kept racing. The bikers might be gone for now, but the storm they had started was far from over. A loud knock on the back door startled her out of her thoughts. Liz's heart skipped a beat, her instincts immediately on high alert. She grabbed the crowbar from under the counter, holding it tightly in her hands. The knock came again, louder this time. Liz's finger hovered near the security alarm button, but before she could make a decision, the door opened, and a figure stepped inside. It was Ray. His eyes were cold, filled with a quiet rage that made Liz's skin crawl. "Did you really think you could get away from me?" he said, his voice low and threatening. Liz stepped back, ready to fight, but Ray wasn't alone. 3 more bikers crowded in behind him, blocking the exit. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. "What do you think will happen now that Ray and his crew are back? Will Liz and Luke be able to fight them off, or is this the end of the line for the cafe? Let us know your predictions in the comments." The cold draft of the night air rushed in with Ray's gang, sending a chill through the cafe. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness of the room. Liz's heart skipped a beat, her hands still gripping the crowbar, ready for whatever came next. Ray smirked as he stepped further into the cafe, his boots scraping against the floor. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you made a mistake, Liz. You made me mad." His men flanked him, all of them towering over her, their eyes cold and unblinking. Liz's pulse quickened. There was no backing down now. Her cafe, her home, was under siege, and she wouldn't let these thugs take it without a fight. "Get out, Ray," Liz said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "You've already done enough damage." Ray chuckled darkly, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. "You think you can talk your way out of this? Think again." His eyes flicked to Luke, who had instinctively reached for his gun. "Don't even think about it, Sheriff. You're not in control here. Not anymore." Liz's mind raced. She couldn't let him intimidate her, not now. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to stall for time. "Money? The cafe? Whatever it is, you're not getting it." Ray's grin widened, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. "No, it's not about the money. It's about making a point, about showing everyone that I get what I want. And tonight, I want you to learn that when I say something's mine, it stays mine." Liz could feel the heat of anger rising inside her. He had no right to claim anything of hers. This place was her life, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Without warning, one of Ray's men lunged forward, trying to grab Liz's arm. Instinct took over. Liz sidestepped and swung the crowbar in a wide arc, catching him across the chest. He staggered back, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. "Back off," she shouted, her voice fierce. "I'm not going down without a fight." Ray's expression darkened, and he motioned for his men to advance. But before they could take another step, the sound of a loud engine roared outside, the rumble shaking the walls of the cafe. Liz's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know who it was, but it was enough to momentarily freeze the bikers in their tracks. The door burst open, and a figure stepped in. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a face covered in a thick beard. His eyes scanned the room, settling on Ray and his men. "You've got some nerve," the man said, his voice a gravelly growl. "I've been hearing about you for days, and I'm getting sick of it." Liz's mouth went dry. She didn't recognize him, but the way he carried himself, like someone who had seen his share of battles, made her hopeful. He wasn't afraid, and that was exactly what she needed right now. Luke stepped forward, his gun still drawn, but now his posture was more relaxed. "This is Steve," Luke said, a hint of approval in his voice. "He's got the right kind of experience to deal with guys like Ray." Ray's gaze flicked to Steve, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Who the hell are you?" Ray sneered. Steve didn't flinch. "I'm the guy who's going to make sure you and your crew don't cause any more trouble." Ray's men glanced at each other, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Liz could sense the tension in the air. The bikers were starting to doubt whether this was a fight they wanted to continue. But Ray wasn't backing down. "You brought in some backup, huh?" Ray's tone dripped with contempt. "That won't save you." Before Liz could react, Steve moved faster than she expected, his hand reaching into his jacket and pulling out a heavy-duty flashlight. With a swift, practiced motion, he threw it toward one of Ray's men, hitting him in the face with a sickening thud. The man stumbled back, blood streaming from his nose. The room erupted into chaos. The bikers roared in fury, and before anyone could process the situation, the fight was on. Liz didn't hesitate. She swung the crowbar again, this time hitting another of Ray's men across the face. He crumpled to the ground, dazed but still alive. Luke fired a warning shot into the air, his voice booming. "This ends now. Leave, or I'll make sure you regret it." Ray was seething now, his face red with rage. He stepped forward, but Steve was right behind him, a powerful force that sent him stumbling backward. "This is your last chance, Ray," Steve growled. "You don't want to escalate this." Liz didn't wait to see what would happen next. She grabbed Luke's arm, pulling him toward the back of the cafe. "We need to move now." The two of them rushed toward the back door, with Steve holding off the bikers, buying them just enough time. Liz's heart was racing, but the adrenaline was fueling her every step. She couldn't keep running forever. This fight had to end tonight. As they burst through the back exit, Liz took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew they were far from safe. Ray would be back, angrier than before. But for now, they had bought themselves a little breathing room. "Are you okay?" Luke asked, his voice calm but edged with concern. Liz nodded, though her thoughts were already racing ahead. "We need to take the fight to them. If we wait around, it'll be too late. This ends tonight, Luke. We can't let them control this town. What do you think will happen next? Will Liz and Luke be able to take down Ray and his gang for good? Or will they have to face even more dangers? Let us know what you think in the comments below." The night was thick with tension as Liz, Luke, and Steve sat at a table in the back of the cafe. The storm had passed, but the uncertainty of the situation was far from over. The cafe was quiet now, a stark contrast to the chaos just a few hours ago. The smell of spilled coffee still lingered, but there was a new, sharper scent in the air, the scent of preparation. "We need to hit them hard," Steve said, his voice steady but filled with the kind of confidence that only came from experience. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Liz and Luke. "We can't let them get the upper hand again. They'll keep coming back until we show them we mean business." Liz nodded, the weight of what was about to happen settling heavily on her shoulders. She had fought back before, but this time, the stakes were higher. The bikers were after more than just intimidation. They wanted control, and Liz wasn't about to let them take it. "I agree," Luke said, his fingers drumming on the table. "But we have to be smart about this. Ray won't go down easily, and if we go in half-cocked, we could end up in a worse position than before." "Smart is good, but we don't have time to plan a perfect strategy," Steve countered. "They're coming for you, Liz. The longer we wait, the more time they have to regroup. We hit them where it hurts, right now." Liz's mind raced. She couldn't let the bikers continue terrorizing the town. She couldn't let them push her around any longer. But what if Steve was right? What if waiting wasn't an option? Every second they hesitated, the bikers were getting stronger, and the people she cared about were more vulnerable. "I don't want to wait anymore," Liz said, her voice firm. "I want to take them down, and I want to do it now." Luke met her gaze, his brow furrowed. "You sure about this, Liz? There's no turning back once we go in. It's not just the bikers we're up against. There's a whole operation behind them." "I don't care," Liz replied, her voice unwavering. "I've had enough of them controlling everything. This ends now." Steve's lips curled into a tight smile. "That's the spirit. But we need to hit them in their weak spots. Ray's not just running a gang. He's got a whole operation. If we take down their supply lines, their muscle, and their contacts, it'll cripple them." Luke nodded slowly, processing the plan. "We need to go after their bikes. Their main base is just outside of town. If we can take those down, it'll send a message. They'll lose their mobility, and it'll be harder for them to regroup." Liz thought for a moment. "I know where they park their bikes. It's out by the old quarry. I've seen them there late at night." Steve grinned. "Perfect. We hit the quarry, take out the bikes, and cause as much chaos as possible. The bikers will have to scramble to fix their operation. We'll hit them hard and fast, before they even know what's happening." Luke looked at Liz, then at Steve, his jaw clenched. "We do this, we do it right. No hesitation. This is our one shot." Liz's heart pounded in her chest, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. "Let's do it." The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would drive out to the old quarry, take out the bikers' bikes, and leave nothing behind for them to use. No time to wait, no time for second thoughts. They would have to move fast, and they would have to be precise. One mistake, and everything could fall apart. The three of them gathered their gear: flashlights, weapons, and whatever else they could find that might help. Liz found a crowbar, just in case, and a small hammer. Steve brought his usual tools, things he always carried for situations like this. Luke had his gun, but he was also practical enough to know that speed would be their best weapon tonight. As they left the cafe, the cool night air wrapped around them like a blanket, the silence only broken by the sound of their footsteps. Liz was already focused, her mind running through the details of the plan. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Not tonight. The drive to the quarry was quiet. No one spoke, and the tension hung thick in the air. As they approached the entrance to the quarry, they saw the bikes. Several of them were parked in a rough circle, the bikers' dark silhouettes visible in the shadows. Liz's heart raced as they parked a little further down the road, out of sight. The three of them climbed out of the truck, moving quickly and silently toward the bikes. They kept low, using the cover of darkness to conceal their movements. Liz could hear the faint rumble of the engines, but the bikers were too distracted to notice them approaching. They were almost there. Luke gave a subtle nod, signaling that it was time. They moved in a tight formation, covering each other's backs. Steve was the first to reach the bikes, his hands moving quickly to disable the ignition system on the first one. Liz and Luke followed suit, quietly working on the rest of the bikes. It was working. The bikers were oblivious, still chatting among themselves, unaware of the chaos they were about to experience. But just as Liz was about to move to the final bike, a shout pierced the air. "Hey, what the hell?" The sound of footsteps thundered toward them, and Liz's blood ran cold. The bikers had finally noticed. It was too late to back out now. Liz pulled the crowbar from her bag, ready to fight. Steve was already ahead of her, charging toward the bikers with a fierce determination in his eyes. Luke took aim with his gun, ready to protect them, but there was no time for hesitation. The battle had begun. What do you think will happen in the fight? Will Liz and her team be able to take down the bikers and cripple their operation? Or will they face more trouble than they anticipated? Let us know what you think in the comments. The truck teetered on the edge of the steep drop, its wheels hanging dangerously over the edge of the cliff. Liz's heart hammered in her chest, and she could hear the roar of the approaching bikers growing louder. She didn't have much time to think, but her instincts kicked in. They had to get out of there now. "Luke," Liz shouted, her voice tight with urgency. "Get the truck moving." Luke's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes wide with concentration. He pressed the gas pedal, but the truck's wheels spun helplessly against the rock, the tires struggling to gain traction on the uneven ground. "They're getting too close," Steve yelled from the back of the truck. He could see the headlights of the remaining bikers closing in fast. The first of the bikers had almost caught up, and the others were right behind him. "We can't keep this up," Luke shouted back, his voice strained. "I need more speed." Liz's eyes darted around the terrain, searching for any way out. The rocks surrounding them were jagged, but there was a small clearing just ahead. If they could get the truck unstuck, they might have a chance to escape. Liz's mind raced. She jumped out of the truck, grabbing the crowbar from the floor of the passenger seat. "Steve, cover me!" she shouted as she ran to the front of the truck. She crouched down beside the wheel, trying to assess the situation. Steve didn't hesitate. He jumped off the back of the truck and sprinted toward her, his eyes scanning the road for any bikers who might be getting too close. The sound of revving engines grew louder, the bikers closing in. Liz could hear them shouting, but she didn't have the luxury to worry about that. She had to focus on getting them out of here. Come on, Liz muttered under her breath, her hands shaking slightly as she wedged the crowbar under the truck's tire. She tried to lift it, but the weight of the truck made it impossible. Her muscles burned, but she kept going, willing the truck to move. The bike engines roared louder as the bikers drew near. Liz could see the silhouettes in the distance, two bikers on their way toward them, their eyes glinting with anger and determination. She had no time left. Steve was shouting at her, trying to push the truck from behind, but it wasn't enough. The weight of the truck, combined with the rough terrain, made it impossible to budge. Liz's thoughts whirled. There had to be another way. Then, she had an idea. She looked at Luke, still trying to work the engine inside the truck. "Luke," she yelled, "use the winch. Get it hooked to something stable." Luke's eyes snapped to her as he heard the urgency in her voice. He didn't question her. His hands were already moving, quickly unrolling the winch from the back of the truck. "On it!" he shouted back, attaching the cable to a large rock formation just up ahead. "Get ready, Liz." The bikers were almost there, their headlights cutting through the dark, but Liz kept her focus. She ran back to the truck as Luke started the winch. "Pull!" Liz yelled, bracing herself. "Pull it up now." The truck jolted as the winch clicked into action, slowly pulling the vehicle back onto solid ground. Every inch felt like an eternity, the bikers closing in with every passing second. "Just a little more," Steve yelled, His hands pressed against the side of the truck as he pushed with all his strength. The truck finally lurched forward, the tires grabbing hold of the rocky road beneath them. Liz scrambled into the truck, jumping into the passenger seat, and slammed the door shut just as one of the bikers raced past them, barely missing the edge of the cliff. Luke slammed his foot on the accelerator. The truck roared to life and lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt as they tore down the narrow path. Liz could hear the roar of the bikers' engines behind them, but they were slowing down, unable to keep up with the truck on the rough road. "Go, go, go!" Steve shouted from the back as he clung to the truck, looking over his shoulder. "We're losing them." But Liz wasn't taking any chances. She looked ahead, scanning the road. There were no more sharp turns or obstacles for a while. If they could make it to the next curve, they might be able to lose them. They flew down the path, the engine growling beneath them as Luke pushed the truck to its limits. Liz's heart was still racing, but her focus sharpened. The truck was their only chance to escape. If they could just hold their lead, they'd be free. But the bikers weren't far behind. They'd regroup soon, and Liz knew the bikers wouldn't stop until they got revenge. This wasn't over yet. Ahead, she spotted the curve, a narrow, tight bend in the road that led into a small forest. They could use the trees for cover and confuse the bikers, but they'd need to be quick. "Luke, take the next left," Liz yelled, her voice tense with adrenaline. Luke didn't hesitate. He slammed the steering wheel to the left, the tires screeching as they cut into the sharp turn. The truck bounced along the dirt path, narrowly avoiding a large tree. The bikers were still in pursuit, but they were now behind them. Liz could hear the sound of the bikes revving as they tried to catch up, but the trees now obstructed their view. "We've got this," Steve shouted. "Just a little further." Liz didn't let herself relax. They were still being chased. The bikers were unpredictable, and Ray wasn't the type to give up easily. Luke's eyes narrowed as he glanced in the rearview mirror. "They're still coming. We need a place to hide." Liz scanned the road ahead. "I know a spot. Turn left when we get to the clearing." They reached the clearing and Luke made the sharp turn, driving toward a secluded area. Liz could see the narrow road ahead leading to an old abandoned cabin, a perfect place to hide for now. "Pull in here," Liz shouted, pointing toward the cabin. Luke steered the truck toward the overgrown path leading to the cabin. As they drove behind the structure, the trees surrounding them provided enough cover that the bikers couldn't see them from the road. The truck came to a stop, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Liz allowed herself to breathe. "We're safe, for now," Luke muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Steve climbed off the back of the truck and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. "That was too close. They won't give up, though." Liz nodded grimly. "I know, but we've got some time. Let's use it wisely." "Do you think the bikers will catch up with Liz and her team? Or will they manage to stay hidden long enough to regroup and plan their next move? Let us know your predictions in the comments below." The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Liz leaned back against the truck, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods. The eerie stillness seemed to stretch for miles, with nothing but the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had a moment to breathe. Luke killed the engine, and the rumble of the truck faded into the distance. He climbed out of the driver's seat and surveyed the area, his expression still tense. "We should have gotten farther before stopping," he muttered, but his voice was softer now, worn down by the chaos of the last few hours. Liz didn't disagree. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to never let her guard down. They'd gotten lucky tonight, but that luck was running out. The bikers wouldn't stop coming for them until they were dead, or they took down Ray's operation for good. Steve was already pacing in front of the cabin, his eyes scanning the tree line. "We need to get some rest, but we can't afford to drop our guard. If they find us here, it'll be a bloodbath." Liz nodded in agreement. "We rest in shifts. Luke, you first. Steve, you're next. I'll keep watch when I can. We've got to keep moving, but we need to figure out our next step." Luke took a deep breath and rubbed his face, then nodded. "I'll get the fire started," he said, heading toward the back of the cabin where a small stack of dry wood was piled. "We'll keep it small, just enough to keep the cold out." As Luke went to work, Liz pulled out a map of the area. They were near a small mountain range, and there were a few options they could consider. The problem was Ray's operation. Every move they made, every direction they took, brought them closer to the heart of it and closer to danger. She studied the map intently, but a creeping thought gnawed at her. Ray wasn't just a biker gang leader. The more Liz had learned about him over the past few weeks, the more she realized he had ties to something much larger, something more dangerous than they had anticipated. "Steve," Liz said quietly, folding the map and looking up. "Ray's not just a criminal. He's tied in with some serious players. We need to find out who else is backing him." Steve stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You're saying this is bigger than just a biker gang? We're dealing with something more than just that?" Liz nodded. "I think so. We've taken down a few of his guys, but I'm starting to think he's got connections we don't know about, big ones." Luke's voice broke in from the back as he finished arranging the fire. "I don't care how big this operation is. We finish what we started, or we're all dead anyway." Liz met his eyes, and for a moment, she saw the steel in his gaze. It wasn't just the firelight reflecting off his face. It was something deeper. He wasn't afraid of Ray. He was ready to fight. "I hear you, Luke," Liz said, her voice steady. "But we have to be smart. If we go in blind, we'll get picked off one by one. We need intel, and we need to figure out exactly what we're up against." Steve threw up his hands in frustration. "So, what? We just sit here and wait for them to come to us?" Liz didn't flinch. "We don't have a choice. We need a plan. We know where they are, and we know their weaknesses. But this isn't just a fight against bikers anymore. We're up against something much bigger than that, and if we want to survive, we need to be prepared." Steve looked away, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I get it. I'm just ready for this to be over." "I know," Liz said softly. "We all are." The fire crackled in the background as the three of them settled into an uneasy silence. Liz's mind raced, but she knew there was no way forward without a plan. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a fight to bring down a dangerous empire, and if they didn't win, they would become just another casualty in Ray's ruthless war. The hours passed slowly. They ate what little they had left in their packs, and the conversation drifted to other topics, distracting themselves from the growing tension. But the truth was clear. This wasn't over. They were on the brink of something much larger than a simple fight with bikers. Night fell, and the forest around the cabin seemed to close in. Liz kept watch, her eyes scanning the darkness, her hand resting on her weapon. Every creak of a branch, every movement in the trees, had her on edge. She couldn't afford to relax, not even for a second. The bikers were still out there, and she had a feeling they weren't going to let up. In the quiet of the night, Liz's mind kept circling back to the same question. What was Ray's next move? They needed answers, and the only way to get them was to strike first. Liz was certain that once they knew Ray's plans, they could take him down, but the time to act was growing short. She looked over at her team. Steve, already half asleep, and Luke, who was deep in thought, the flickering light of the fire dancing on his face. They would need everything they had to bring this down, and Liz was willing to push them to the limit. What do you think Ray's next move will be? Will Liz and her team be able to gather the intel they need to take down his operation? Or will they be caught off guard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The air was thick with tension as Liz sat against the cabin wall, her eyes scanning the forest's edge. The night had been eerily quiet, too quiet, and every rustle of the trees sent a chill through her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Luke and Steve were asleep, their faces shadowed by the flickering firelight. The only sound was the occasional snap of a twig or the distant howls of coyotes in the night. But Liz knew it was only a matter of time before the bikers came looking for them. She couldn't afford to fall asleep. Not yet. Not until they had a solid plan. Suddenly, her sharp hearing caught a sound, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming. Liz's pulse quickened, and she immediately grabbed her rifle, moving silently across the cabin to the front window. She peered through the small crack in the wooden planks, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows outside were almost complete, but the figure moving toward them was unmistakable. A biker. He was alone. That at least was good news. But Liz didn't trust it for a second. There was no such thing as a lone wolf in Ray's crew. This could be a trap. Liz turned back toward the others, her voice a harsh whisper. Wake up. Now. Luke stirred, groggily opening his eyes, and Steve shot up from his position, his hand immediately going for his weapon. What's going on? Luke mumbled, his voice rough from sleep. I saw someone, Liz whispered. Biker, heading straight for us. I don't think it's just a coincidence. Great, Steve muttered, reaching for the rifle that rested on the ground beside him. You think they're just going to let us sleep it off? Of course they're coming for us. Liz took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. We need to decide fast. If he's alone, we might be able to deal with him quietly. If not, she let the sentence hang in the air. No one needed to say it aloud. If they were walking into a trap, the consequences could be deadly. We have no choice, Luke said, determination in his voice. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. We can't let him get back to Ray. Liz nodded. I'll take point. Stay close and keep your heads down. We'll get this done before anyone else shows up. The three of them crept out of the cabin, moving silently through the woods toward the front. Liz led the way, her body tense, every sense alert as she approached the clearing where the biker had stopped. The biker was crouched low, his back to them. Liz could see the flicker of his cigarette as he took a drag. He hadn't noticed them yet. The perfect opportunity. She motioned to Steve and Luke to get into position, and they spread out to flank him, moving quickly but quietly. Liz's hand tightened around the rifle, ready to take him out in one clean shot if necessary. They were mere feet from the biker when his head snapped around, his eyes locking onto Liz's. Time seemed to slow as they both froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Who the hell are you? The biker spat, his hand going to the knife on his belt. Before Liz could respond, he lunged at her, and she barely had time to react. He was fast, a wild look in his eyes, his face twisted in anger. He slashed at her with the blade, and Liz sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the strike. Down! Liz shouted, as she ducked low to the ground, scrambling to grab her gun. The biker lunged again, but this time, Liz was ready. She ducked under his arm and grabbed a nearby branch, swinging it with all her strength. The biker grunted in pain as the branch connected with his ribs, sending him stumbling back. But he was far from finished. His eyes burned with fury, and he came at her again, this time more determined. Liz's heart raced. She knew this fight wasn't over. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Luke was the first to move, firing a shot that rang through the air, forcing the biker to dodge. Steve followed, closing the distance with rapid strides, his own weapon raised. Drop the knife, Steve yelled, his voice cold and authoritative. The biker snarled, refusing to back down. With a quick movement, he lunged at Steve. But Liz wasn't about to let that happen. She fired a warning shot into the air. Enough, she shouted, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. We're not here to kill you, but we will if we have to. The biker froze, his eyes darting between Liz and the others. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was considering his options. Then, he let out a low chuckle. You think I'm scared of you, he sneered. Ray's got an army lady. You're nothing. Just wait until he... Liz didn't wait for him to finish. With one swift move, she disarmed him, knocking the knife out of his hand and bringing him to his knees. He grunted in pain, but she pressed the barrel of her gun to his forehead, her expression hardening. Tell me everything, Liz demanded, her voice low and threatening. Where is Ray? What's he planning? The biker's eyes widened, but he didn't speak immediately. Liz pressed the barrel harder against his skin, and he let out a defeated sigh. All right, he muttered. Ray's got a meeting set up. Big deal. He's calling in reinforcements. He's planning something big. I don't know what it is, but it's happening soon. Real soon. Liz's heart raced as the biker continued, his words confirming what she had feared. Ray wasn't just some small-time criminal. He was organizing something dangerous, something that could destroy them all if they weren't careful. Where's the meeting? Liz demanded. The biker hesitated. Liz pressed the barrel harder against his forehead, and he flinched. A place called the Red Widow, big warehouse on the edge of town. That's all I know, I swear. Liz's mind was already racing. The Red Widow. It was the last place she wanted to go, but it was where Ray would be. She didn't have much time. Get out of here, she said, shoving him to the ground. And if I see you again, I won't be so kind. The biker scrambled to his feet and ran off into the night, disappearing into the shadows. Liz didn't hesitate. Let's move. We've got no time to lose. What do you think Ray's big plan is? Do you think Liz and her team can get to the Red Widow in time to stop it? Let us know your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. The night air was thick with a foreboding chill as Liz, Luke, and Steve navigated their way through the darkened forest, the Red Widow warehouse looming ahead like a monstrous silhouette against the starless sky. The biker's warning echoed in Liz's mind. Ray's got an army? She wasn't sure what big meant, but she knew one thing for certain. The closer they got to the warehouse, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her shoulders. The stakes had never been higher, and if they failed now, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. As they approached the outskirts of the warehouse, Liz gestured for them to stop. The place was massive, an industrial building, long abandoned by most businesses, now repurposed by Ray's gang. A lone guard stood by the entrance, the glow of a cigarette illuminating his face in the darkness. Steve lowered his voice, barely a whisper. That's our guy. Liz nodded. Keep quiet. Luke, you take the left. Steve, you're with me on the right. We'll flank him. No unnecessary noise. They moved swiftly, almost in perfect synchronization. Liz's boots made no sound as she crept toward the guard's position, her eyes locked on him. She could tell he was getting antsy, likely from the cold, his body tense as he glanced back toward the shadows. Steve's hand was already on his weapon, prepared for whatever came next. Liz's own hand was steady on the grip of her rifle, her breathing shallow. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. The guard took another drag from his cigarette, unaware of the threat closing in on him. Liz signaled to Steve, and they both moved simultaneously. With one swift move, Liz grabbed the guard from behind, clamping a hand over his mouth to stifle his yell. She twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground before he could react. Steve was right beside her, holding the guard's struggling body down as Liz searched his pockets. Who else is inside? Liz demanded, her voice low but firm. The guard's eyes widened with panic, and for a split second, Liz thought he might actually break and start talking. But then he clenched his teeth, refusing to answer. Liz wasn't about to waste any time. She pulled a small knife from her belt and pressed it to his throat. Last chance, she said, her voice deadly calm. Tell me how many men are inside, or this gets real ugly. The guard's resolve crumbled. Fine, he stammered. There's at least 15 inside. I don't know about the back rooms, but they're all packed in there, waiting for something. Some big deal going down. Liz didn't need to hear more. 15 men. If they didn't act fast, the odds would be stacked against them. Get him inside, Liz ordered Steve, nodding toward the warehouse entrance. Tie him up. We can't leave him out here. Steve nodded, dragging the guard to his feet. Liz and Luke exchanged a brief glance, their faces hard with determination. The time for hesitation was over. They moved quickly, slipping past the guard's post and entering through a small side door they'd spotted on the way in. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, with large crates and piles of supplies scattered about. The smell of oil, rust, and sweat hung in the air, a grim reminder of what Ray's operation truly was. Liz's mind raced as she led the group through the shadows, her footsteps light but sure. The warehouse was buzzing with activity. Voices echoed from deeper within, but no one seemed to notice their approach. She motioned for them to take cover behind a stack of crates. From there, Liz could make out a group of men gathered around a makeshift table, maps and papers strewn across its surface. In the center stood Ray, his back to them, barking orders at the men around him. Liz's pulse quickened as she recognized him. Ray was exactly what she had imagined, tall, dark-haired, and sharp-eyed, with an intimidating presence that seemed to command respect. He had the look of a man who was used to being in control. This is it, Liz whispered, barely audible. We need to get closer, find out what he's planning. Luke nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Let's move. They began to inch forward, making their way along the shadows, careful to avoid being seen. The tension in the air was palpable, and Liz's heart pounded as they drew nearer to Ray and his men. Suddenly, a loud crash sounded from the back of the warehouse. It wasn't close enough to cause alarm, but it was enough to make Liz pause. Ray turned around sharply, his eyes narrowing. He motioned for his men to stand guard and walked toward the back of the room. Liz barely had time to react. "This is our chance," she hissed. "Go." The three of them moved as one, slipping past the men still stationed near the table and heading deeper into the warehouse. Liz's eyes were fixed on Ray, who had stopped to speak with one of his lieutenants near a set of closed doors at the far end of the room. They were almost there. Liz's hand was on the handle of the door, ready to push it open. But then, as if on cue, the warehouse lights flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness. A wave of panic shot through Liz, but she quickly suppressed it. They couldn't afford to panic. They had to keep moving. Luke cursed under his breath, but Liz grabbed his arm. "Stay calm. We're almost there." They heard the shuffle of feet and the low mutter of voices as the gang members began to scramble, disoriented by the sudden darkness. Liz motioned for them to move faster, but it was too late. One of the gang members had spotted them, his shout breaking the silence. "Over there! Intruders!" Ray's men erupted into action, drawing weapons and shouting orders. Liz's heart raced as she pushed the door open, charging through it into the unknown. Inside was a large, dimly lit room. Rows of crates lined the walls, but it was the center of the room that caught Liz's attention. A massive safe stood in the corner, its door ajar. Ray had been hiding something big. Before Liz could investigate, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. They were surrounded. The only way out was through the chaos, and the storm was closing in. What do you think is inside the safe? Will Liz and her team survive this deadly encounter and uncover Ray's secret? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The warehouse was filled with a sense of impending doom. The air thick with the smell of oil and sweat, mixed with the sharp metallic tang of fear. Liz's breath was shallow as she pressed her back against the wall of the room, listening intently to the growing footsteps outside. The gang was closing in fast, but there was something more important to focus on right now. The massive safe in the corner. The door was ajar, just wide enough for Liz to see what was inside. She didn't need to see much to know it was serious. The stack of documents, maps, and briefcases weren't just ordinary paperwork. They looked like the kind of files that could shake the foundations of a criminal empire. "Liz, we don't have much time," Luke said, his voice low and tense. He had a gun in his hand, his eyes darting back and forth between the door and Liz. "Ray's men are almost here. We need to get out now." Liz glanced over her shoulder. Luke was right. The sounds of heavy boots and hurried footsteps were growing louder. They had seconds, not minutes. But as she studied the papers, a wave of realization hit her hard. Ray wasn't just running a gang. He was running something much bigger, something far more dangerous. "Hold up," Liz said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just some street-level operation. He's into something way worse." "What are you talking about?" Steve asked, his voice full of urgency. He was watching the door, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Liz quickly grabbed one of the thick folders from the safe. She flipped it open, scanning the contents. Her eyes widened as she read through the documents. The names, the dates, the locations. This wasn't about drugs or arms trafficking. This was something on a global scale, something that could cause chaos far beyond what they had imagined. "This is bigger than I thought," Liz murmured. "Ray's not just running a gang. These documents, they're about weapons, international trade, even political manipulation. He's connected to global arms dealers and mercenaries." Her mind raced as she absorbed the weight of what they had just stumbled upon. Ray had been planning something massive, far beyond just taking control of the streets. If these documents got into the wrong hands, it could start a war. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping a catastrophe. Steve moved closer, peering over Liz's shoulder at the papers. "We need to burn this stuff, right? Destroy it before they realize what we have." Liz shook her head. "No, this is too big. We can't just burn it. We need to get this to the authorities. We need backup, but we can't let Ray or his people get their hands on it. Luke clenched his jaw, his eyes flicking toward the door. And we need to get out of here alive. No offense, but we're not equipped to handle whatever's coming through that door. Liz nodded grimly. Agreed. Let's move. We'll head for the back exit. Grab what we can carry, and don't look back. The tension was unbearable as Liz quickly scooped up the files and shoved them into her bag. Steve was already on the move, covering the door while Luke made sure there was no one coming from the back. Go! Liz ordered, pulling herself into motion. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the chaos in the front of the warehouse. Liz's heart was pounding, every muscle tense, but her mind was locked on one thing. They couldn't leave empty-handed. The back exit was closer than Liz had expected, but it was guarded. Two of Ray's men stood by the door, eyes darting around as they kept watch. Liz glanced at Luke, who nodded silently, signaling that they were ready. Without hesitation, Liz grabbed a handful of small stones from the ground and hurled them against a stack of crates across the room. The noise was loud enough to draw the attention of the guards, who immediately turned toward the sound. Now was their chance. Steve moved first, drawing his weapon and firing a single shot that hit one of the guards square in the shoulder. The guard grunted in pain, falling backward, and the second guard lunged toward them with a knife drawn. Liz didn't hesitate. She drew her own gun and shot the second guard in the leg, bringing him down before he could make a move. Go, go, she shouted, rushing for the back door. Luke and Steve followed close behind, but as they reached the exit, they heard a loud voice behind them. Don't let them escape. Ray's voice rang out, filled with rage. After them. Liz's heart sank. They were too late. The whole warehouse was now on high alert. They burst through the back door into the alleyway, the cool night air hitting their faces like a slap. Liz turned around, scanning the area. The street was empty, and the sound of boots pounding against the ground echoed from the warehouse, growing louder. We can't stay here, Liz said. We need to split up. They'll be looking for us in groups. Luke nodded. I'll head north. Meet you at the old diner. It's a couple miles from here. Steve was already moving, checking the area for any sign of pursuit. I'll go east. Same plan. Diner. We'll rendezvous there. Liz didn't waste time arguing. They couldn't afford it. She had the files, and now they needed to disappear, to stay alive long enough to get those documents to the right hands. I'll cover south, Liz said. Let's move. They scattered, each heading in a different direction, hearts racing as they separated. Liz didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. The moment they separated was the moment they became targets. Her feet pounded the pavement as she ran, her mind focused on the goal. The diner wasn't far, but the sense of being hunted was always there, lurking in the shadows. She kept glancing over her shoulder, ready to draw her gun at a moment's notice. But there was something else nagging at her. The documents. Ray was dangerous, but whoever was behind these global operations, they were far worse. Liz's stomach tightened. They had just uncovered a Pandora's box, and now they had to deal with the fallout. What do you think Liz's next move should be? How can they stay one step ahead of Ray and his gang while also dealing with the threat of the global operation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Liz's breath came in quick gasps as she rounded the corner of an alley, her feet pounding the pavement beneath her. The cool night air stung her skin, but her mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to think about anything else. Not the files weighing down her backpack, not the danger of Ray's men closing in, and certainly not the global operation they had uncovered. The diner. That's where she had to meet Luke and Steve. It was the only place they could be sure of. It wasn't just a neutral spot. It was one of the few places in town where Liz knew she could disappear into the shadows if need be. Old, run down, and under the radar, it was the perfect place to lay low while they regrouped and figured out their next move. Liz's heart was pounding in her chest, but she pushed herself harder, not allowing the fatigue to take hold. She had to keep going. She had to make sure they all got out alive. As she approached the diner, she noticed the flickering neon sign, Mel's Diner, casting a dull light across the cracked sidewalk. The place was quiet, as it always was at this hour. and there was no sign of anyone watching her. It was the calm before the storm. Liz slipped inside through the side door, the bell above it ringing softly as she entered. The diner was nearly empty, just an elderly couple sitting in a corner booth, whispering to each other, oblivious to the world outside. Liz didn't waste any time. She went straight to the back booth, the one that had the best view of the entrance and allowed for a quick exit if things went south. She slid into the booth and slid her bag under the table, her eyes scanning the room, watching for any signs of trouble. The door jingled again as another customer entered. A burly man in a leather jacket, with a thick beard and an attitude that screamed trouble. Liz tensed, her fingers instinctively brushing the handle of her gun hidden under her jacket. But the man didn't seem to notice her as he made his way to the counter. Minutes passed, then 10 more. Liz started to feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her. Where were Luke and Steve? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Liz quickly pulled it out, her eyes scanning the text. It was from Luke. Near the back. Stay low. Liz's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. They were close, but she couldn't see them. She glanced around the diner again, trying to spot any unusual movements. Nothing. Seconds ticked by, and the tension in the air thickened. Liz's instincts were on high alert, her eyes moving between the door and the windows, scanning for any sign of movement. The bell above the door jingled again. Liz turned her head just as Luke and Steve slipped inside, moving swiftly to the back booth. Steve gave her a tight nod, his eyes scanning the diner as he slid into the booth across from her. Luke was already looking out the window, his gaze steely and focused. "Talk to me," Liz said, her voice low. Steve leaned forward, speaking quietly. "Ray's men are still looking for us. It's not safe here for long. We've got to get this information to the authorities, and fast. But we can't go back to the hotel. We need a new plan." Luke's eyes narrowed as he looked out the window. "They're closing in. They'll check the diner soon, and when they do, they'll know we're here." Liz sat back, her fingers tapping on the table as she thought. Her mind raced, but she kept her composure. The files, they're not just about Ray. These are international. Whoever's behind this, they won't stop until they get it back. We need backup, and we need to move now. Steve frowned. "And who exactly do you think we can trust at this point? Ray's not the only problem anymore. There's a whole network behind this." Liz locked eyes with him, her voice hardening. "We don't have a choice. We have to trust someone. The files, they could bring down an entire operation. If we don't get them to the right people, Ray's people will be the least of our worries." The three of them sat in silence, each of them weighing the risks of what came next. Outside, a car door slammed, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the alley. Liz's instincts flared. They didn't have much time. "I think we have no choice but to make contact with my old military contact," Liz said suddenly. "I don't trust anyone in law enforcement right now, but I know someone who can help us." Luke raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Who?" "Captain James Warren," Liz replied. "He owes me. He's high enough up the chain that he'll be able to make sure this gets handled properly. If anyone can help us, it's him." Steve looked between the two of them. "Are you sure? You trust him?" Liz hesitated, then nodded. "I have no other choice." "Fine," Luke said, pulling out his phone. "I'll text him. We'll have to move fast, though. Ray's gang won't be the only one looking for us. If we're not careful, we'll end up in a fight we can't win." Liz didn't argue. She knew he was right. She just hoped Captain Warren was as reliable as she remembered. The seconds stretched out like hours as Luke sent the message. Liz kept her eyes on the door, scanning for any signs of movement. Her fingers itched for the comfort of her weapon, but she couldn't risk drawing attention. Finally, Luke put his phone away. "He's in. He'll meet us in 30 minutes. We need to be on the move when we do." "Good," Liz said, nodding. "Now we wait and pray." What do you think will happen next? Can Liz and her team trust Captain Warren, or are they walking straight into another trap? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The diner was now even quieter than before. Liz, Luke, and Steve sat in their booth, eyes glued to the door, hands subtly resting on their weapons, ready to react at a moment's notice. Each tick of the clock seemed louder than the last. They knew the rendezvous was approaching, but something about this felt off. Their nerves were on edge, and every new sound made their muscles tense. "I don't like this," Steve murmured, his gaze fixed on the door. "I have a bad feeling about this whole thing." Liz didn't respond immediately. Her mind was still processing the information they had uncovered about Ray's operation. She was trying to focus on the plan. She had to trust Captain Warren. He had helped her and her unit out of tough situations in the past, but that was a long time ago. They hadn't spoken since her discharge, and she wasn't sure what kind of person he'd become in the years since. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She checked the message. It was from Captain Warren. "I'm here. Back parking lot. Don't bring attention to yourselves." Liz's stomach dropped. He was here. But something about his cryptic message made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Why the back lot? Why not inside, where it would be safer? Her gut told her this wasn't as simple as just handing off the files. "We've got a problem," Liz said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke looked up sharply. "What is it?" "Warren's in the back parking lot," Liz replied, keeping her eyes on the diner's windows. "That's a little too isolated. I don't like it." Steve shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "That's a setup. He could be leading us into an ambush." Liz nodded slowly, her mind working through the possibilities. She'd been in enough tight situations to know that instincts like this couldn't be ignored. But they couldn't afford to wait either. The files were too valuable. They needed to move quickly, but carefully. "I think we should go," Liz said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her thoughts. "We'll play it cautious. But we go. If it's a trap, we fight our way out." Luke's jaw tightened. "Fine. But if it's a setup, we don't trust anyone else after this. We go dark." Liz stood up, sliding her bag under her coat and adjusting her jacket. "We're not leaving without backup. Let's just make it through this, no matter what." The three of them moved toward the back exit, sticking to the shadows as they made their way through the diner's alley. The night was eerily quiet. No cars on the street, no sounds of distant voices. The city felt deserted, like a waiting trap. When they reached the back parking lot, Liz immediately scanned the area. There was a single car parked in the far corner, just like Warren had said. It was an unmarked black sedan. Liz's eyes narrowed as she looked for any signs of danger, any movement. But the lot was empty. It was as if the place was made to be a perfect hiding spot. Luke moved first, staying low as he approached the car. Liz and Steve followed, their steps careful and deliberate. They were just a few feet away from the car when the driver's side door opened. Liz's hand instinctively went to her gun, but she froze when she saw the man stepping out of the car. It wasn't Captain Warren. It was a woman. She was tall, wearing a dark jacket and sunglasses that hid most of her face, but the way she stood, confident and unbothered, told Liz everything she needed to know. This woman was no stranger to danger. In fact, she was probably the one in control here. "Who the hell are you?" Steve demanded, his hand on his weapon as he stepped forward. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a slight smirk. "I'm the one who was supposed to meet you. But it looks like your friend didn't tell you everything." Liz's stomach churned. "Where's Captain Warren?" The woman cocked her head slightly, her lips curling into a half smile. "He's indisposed. You're going to want to listen carefully, because I'm your best shot at getting out of this alive." Luke's eyes darted between Liz and the mysterious woman. "You better start talking." The woman glanced over her shoulder, and in the shadows of the alley, two more figures emerged, armed men, clearly part of the same group. Liz felt the tension spike, but the woman's next words kept her grounded. "You think Ray's the problem here? You think those files will save you? You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with urgency. "There's a bigger game at play, one you're just starting to understand." Liz felt her heart race. She'd been right to be cautious. This wasn't about Ray anymore. The files weren't just a bargaining chip in a street war. They were part of something much larger. "What do you mean?" Liz asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Who are you?" The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of hard resolve. "I'm someone who's been trying to stop what's coming for a long time. The operation you're chasing? It's not just about weapons or money. It's about control, global control, and Ray is just a small part of it." Liz's mind was racing. She knew the stakes were high, but this was bigger than anything she'd imagined. I can help you, the woman continued, her voice serious now, but you have to trust me. Steve shook his head. Why should we trust you? The woman stepped closer, her eyes piercing through the shadows. Because I'm the only one who can help you get those files to the right people. And if you don't, the entire world is at risk. The air around them was thick with tension. Liz felt like she was at the edge of something far larger than any fight she'd ever been in. This was no longer just about survival. It was about saving the world from a threat that no one seemed to understand yet. Who are you working for? Liz demanded. The woman smiled again, but this time, it was a warning, not a comfort. That's a question you'll get the answer to soon enough. But for now, you need to make a choice. Liz took a deep breath, weighing her options. If this woman was telling the truth, they were on the brink of something catastrophic. But if she was lying, they were walking straight into a trap. I'm listening, Liz said, her voice steady. Do you think Liz should trust this mysterious woman? What could be the bigger plan behind the global operation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The tension in the air felt almost suffocating as Liz stared at the woman who claimed to be their ally. The two armed men behind her weren't making any moves, but Liz could feel the weight of their presence. Every second that passed, the danger grew. The woman's eyes never wavered. She knew she had them on the edge. You're not the first to be in this position, you know, the woman said, her tone cold and calculating. Ray's men will keep hunting you, but the people you're really up against, they're far worse. They'll stop at nothing to get what's in those files. And I mean nothing. Liz kept her gaze locked on the woman, trying to read her. If you think I'm just going to trust you because you say so, you're wrong. I need answers. Who are you? And why are you suddenly helping us? The woman didn't flinch. I'm someone who knows how dangerous the operation you're tangled in is. I've been hunting these people for years. They have influence everywhere. Government, military, corporations. They're the ones pulling the strings, and they won't stop until they control everything. Liz glanced at Luke and Steve. They were both tense, their hands close to their weapons. I don't like this, Luke muttered under his breath. But she's right. We're already in too deep. Steve turned to Liz, his face hard. It's a choice. We can either keep running from Ray's men and take our chances, or we can find out what this woman really knows. Liz took a deep breath, weighing the risks. She had no illusions. There was a much larger game at play here than Ray's gang. If she turned down the woman's offer, they'd just be on the run for the rest of their lives, constantly looking over their shoulders. But if they trusted her, they could be walking into something far more dangerous. All right, Liz said, her voice steady. We'll listen. But if you betray us, we won't hesitate to take you down. The woman gave a sharp nod, then motioned for the armed men to step back. Good. That's the first step toward survival. Liz motioned for Luke and Steve to follow her, and they began walking toward the car. She kept her senses alert, ready for any sudden move. But the woman simply followed behind them, her calm demeanor unwavering. When they reached the car, the woman climbed into the front seat without another word, and Liz, Luke, and Steve got into the back. Liz could feel the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary encounter. The fact that Ray's men were out there somewhere only made things worse. She had no idea who this woman really was or what she was after. But she knew one thing. Time was running out. As the car started moving, Liz turned to the woman. So, now that we're in this together, tell me everything. What's really going on? Why are these files so important? The woman glanced in the rearview mirror, catching Liz's eyes. The files? They're the key to exposing a global network of corruption and violence that has been operating under the radar for years. They're more than just a list of names. They contain evidence of operations in multiple countries, drug cartels, arms deals, assassinations, all tied together by a group of powerful individuals who think they're untouchable. Liz absorbed the information, trying to process it. She had known Ray's men were dangerous, but this was bigger than she had imagined. If what this woman said was true, they weren't just fighting a street gang. They were fighting a global conspiracy. How do you know all this? Liz asked. The woman met her gaze through the rearview mirror. Let's just say I've been on the inside. I've seen what they can do. And I've spent years gathering intel, trying to figure out how to take them down. Those files you have, they're the missing piece. Missing piece? Steve echoed. What do you mean? The woman's lips twitched into a grim smile. Ray's gang is just one small part of the operation. But those files? They contain the evidence we need to connect the dots. The people behind this are so powerful, they've covered their tracks well. But they made one mistake, leaving you with the files. And now they'll stop at nothing to get them back. A heavy silence settled in the car. Liz could feel the weight of those words pressing down on her. It was all starting to make sense, in a twisted, terrifying way. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much danger they were really in. We don't have much time, do we? Luke asked, breaking the silence. Ray's men won't stop looking for us. And now we've got whoever you're working for after us too. The woman's expression hardened. You're right. We're running out of time. Ray's gang is just the beginning. But they won't be the ones you need to worry about. The real threat is much closer than you think. Liz felt her pulse quicken. What are you talking about? The woman met her gaze again. I'm talking about the people you think you can trust. The people who have been feeding you information. Captain Warren, he's part of it. Liz froze, her heart dropping into her stomach. What do you mean, part of it? The woman's eyes glinted with a cold truth. Warren isn't just some innocent military officer. He's been compromised for years. He's one of them. Liz could hardly breathe. The man she had counted on, the man she had called for help. He was working with the very people they were trying to stop. It was a gut punch she hadn't seen coming. Why didn't you warn us sooner? Liz demanded. The woman shrugged, her voice cold. I didn't trust you. I needed to see where your loyalty lay. And now I know. I'm giving you a chance. But if you don't act fast, it'll be too late. Liz sat back in her seat, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew was falling apart, piece by piece. Captain Warren had been a part of this all along. The files, the gang, the global conspiracy. They were all tangled up in ways she hadn't imagined. And now they were running out of time. What do you think? Can Liz trust this woman? Or is she just leading them deeper into a trap? What will Liz do now that she knows Captain Warren's true loyalties? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The car sped through the empty streets, the engine's growl echoing in the night as Liz's mind raced. She could barely focus on the woman in the front seat, her cold gaze never leaving the road ahead. Captain Warren, a man she had respected, trusted, and relied on, was part of this mess. The realization hit harder than she had imagined. The world she had thought she understood was starting to collapse in on itself. Are you sure about Warren? Liz asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you just trying to manipulate us, or is this the truth? The woman in the front seat glanced in the rearview mirror, her face expressionless. I don't expect you to trust me, but I've been tracking Warren's movements for months. I know what he's involved in. And believe me, if you follow him, it'll be the last mistake you make. Liz's jaw clenched as she processed the words. She had known Warren for years. They had been through hell together in the military. If what this woman said was true, Warren had been playing her all along, feeding her information, helping her while secretly working against her. How do we find him? Luke asked, his voice edged with frustration. If Warren's really the one pulling the strings, we need to move fast. The woman's lips tightened, her eyes flickering to the rearview mirror once more. I've already got a location, but don't be fooled. Warren won't be alone. He's surrounded by a small army of his own. You're walking into a hornet's nest, and you'd better be ready for a fight. Liz nodded, her mind already mapping out the next steps. She had no time to second-guess herself. If Warren was truly working with the enemy, it was time to face him. But she couldn't shake the doubt in her chest. Was she making a mistake? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Liz pulled it out, heart sinking as she saw the name on the screen. It was Warren. Put it on speaker, Liz said, her voice tight. The woman in the front seat glanced back briefly, then hit a button on the console. Warren's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding calm and collected. But there was something in his tone that made Liz's skin crawl. Liz, Warren said, his voice smooth. I'm glad you've got the files. I knew you'd come through, but I think you've been misled. The people you're dealing with, they're not who you think they are. Liz's grip tightened on her phone. What are you talking about, Warren? There was a pause, and for a moment, Liz thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he spoke, his voice colder than before. You've been used, Liz. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had no choice. The higher-ups gave me no option but to play along. You're chasing a ghost, and those files you're holding, they're a part of something much bigger than you realize. The people behind this, they've got the power to make sure you never walk away from this. You've been too deep from the start. Liz's chest tightened as the words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had been so sure that Warren was on her side. Had he really been working with the very people she was trying to take down? Or was this just another trap? I trusted you, Liz said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. All this time, I trusted you. And now I find out you've been part of this from the beginning? I never wanted to drag you into this, Liz. Warren's voice softened. But Liz wasn't buying it. But you need to understand. I'm doing what I have to do to survive. And now, so are you. If you want to make it out of this alive, you need to let go of your loyalty to me and face the reality. You're alone in this. The call ended with a click. The silence in the car was deafening as Liz processed his words. Her mind raced, but no matter how many times she replayed their conversation, the truth was the same. She had been betrayed. So, what now? Steve asked, his tone grim. We know where he is, but do we really want to walk into his trap? Liz's knuckles were white from gripping the seat. We don't have a choice. We confront him. If he's been working for them all along, we need to know exactly what he knows. And we'll make sure he never has the chance to turn on us again. The woman in the front seat remained silent. Her eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, then to the side. You'll need backup. Warren is well protected. But if you want to confront him, you'll need to get to him before he disappears. Liz nodded, her decision made. She had trusted Warren more than anyone in her life, but that trust had been shattered. It was time for answers, and no matter what it took, she was going to get them. The car turned a corner, and Liz could see the faint outline of a large building in the distance. It was an industrial complex, far from any civilian area. This was it. Warren's headquarters, or at least, where he was hiding. Stay sharp, Liz ordered. We don't know what we're walking into, but we're going in prepared. No more games. As they approached the entrance, Liz's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of the end. No matter what happened next, things were never going to be the same. The moment they stopped in front of the complex, Liz's hand hovered over her weapon, ready for anything. She had no idea what Captain Warren's true loyalties were anymore, but she couldn't afford to waste any more time. She was done trusting the wrong people, and when the door opened, she was ready to face whatever, or whoever, was waiting for her inside. Do you think Liz is making a huge mistake confronting Warren? Or is this the only way to get to the truth? What's your take on the betrayal? Should she trust this mysterious woman, or is she walking into another trap? Let us know what you think in the comments below. The night air was thick with tension as Liz, Luke, Steve, and the mysterious woman made their way toward the industrial complex. Their footsteps echoed across the cracked concrete, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them. Liz's heart raced, her mind whirling with all the unanswered questions. Why had Warren betrayed her? What was his true role in this global conspiracy? And most importantly, what was his plan for them now? As they approached the entrance, Liz could see two armed guards standing watch. They were well trained, their movements sharp and controlled. Liz knew this wouldn't be easy. We need to move fast, the woman in the front seat whispered. If we waste time, Warren will be long gone. He has enough resources to disappear at a moment's notice. Liz nodded. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. Look, Steve, Liz said, her voice low but steady. We go in fast, get to Warren, and get out. No messing around. Luke adjusted his grip on his weapon and gave a sharp nod. Got it. Steve didn't say anything, but his eyes hardened with determination. They were all in this together now. The woman led them through a side entrance, keeping low and moving quickly. Liz kept her senses alert, her hand on her weapon. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Warren wasn't going to get away this time. They reached a hallway that seemed to go on forever, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering above them. At the end of the corridor, Liz could see a door guarded by 2 more men. The tension in the air was palpable. This was it, the moment of truth. The woman motioned for them to stop, then stepped forward, her voice cold and calculated. "Leave it to me." Liz didn't argue. She was done with second-guessing. She needed answers, and Warren was the only one who could provide them. The woman approached the door, speaking in a low, controlled tone to the guards. Liz strained to hear but couldn't make out the words. Whatever the woman said worked, though. The guards moved aside, allowing them entry. The door creaked open, and Liz stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with the hum of machines and the sound of distant voices. Liz's eyes scanned the space, looking for any signs of movement. And then she saw him. Captain Warren, standing in the center of the room, his back turned to them. For a moment, Liz's heart skipped a beat. There he was, the man she had trusted more than anyone. But now, seeing him standing there, her trust felt like a distant memory. She had to remind herself why she was here. This was no time for nostalgia. "Warren," Liz called, her voice firm. He turned slowly, a faint, almost regretful smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Liz," he said, his voice smooth, but there was something in his eyes that didn't sit right with her. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "I'm done playing games, Warren," Liz said, stepping forward. "You've been working with them all along, haven't you? The people behind everything. The ones who think they control it all." Warren's eyes flickered, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he let out a long sigh. "You don't understand, Liz. I never wanted to be a part of this, but I had no choice. You think you're fighting some noble cause, but it's a war you can't win. These people, they have too much power, and you're just one person, a pawn in a much bigger game." Liz's anger flared, but she kept it in check. "A pawn? You think I'm just some pawn? You used me. You let me think you were on my side. You lied to me, Warren. All this time." Warren didn't flinch. He looked at her with a mixture of sadness and something darker. "I did what I had to do, to survive, to protect what I care about. You should have understood that. I never wanted you involved, but when you took those files, it was already too late. You've been marked. They'll stop at nothing to get them back." Liz's fists clenched. "So, this is your plan? To turn on me and run with your tail between your legs?" Warren's face hardened, and for the first time, Liz saw a flash of real anger in his eyes. "You don't get it. I'm not the one running. I'm trying to save you. You're too deep in this now. There's no way out. Not for you. Not for any of us." Liz's voice was steady, but it carried the weight of everything she'd been through. "I don't care if you think I'm too deep in it. I'm going to stop them, and you're not going to stand in my way." For a moment, the room was dead silent. Warren's gaze softened, almost like he was trying to find a way to reach her, to convince her that he was right. But Liz wasn't having it. "Listen to me," Warren said quietly, his voice a low warning. "If you go through with this, you'll never walk away. These people, if they catch you, they won't kill you. They'll make you wish you were dead. You'll never see your family again. You'll never be free." Liz took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't need your warnings, Warren. You're the one who's sold out. You're the one who's given up. I'm not you." His expression twisted, and for a moment, Liz thought he might say something else, something to convince her. But instead, he just shook his head, his jaw clenched in resignation. "I tried, Liz," he whispered. "I really did. But now, I have to make sure you don't get us both killed." With that, Warren turned, his hand reaching for a hidden switch on the wall. Liz's instincts kicked in before he could react. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. The sudden movement caught him off guard, and Warren stumbled, letting out a strangled grunt. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Liz warned, her voice low and dangerous. Warren stopped struggling and looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "You're right. It doesn't have to be this way." Liz held her ground, her grip on his arm firm. "Then stop hiding behind your lies. You've made your choice, Warren. Now, it's time for me to make mine." Do you think Liz should keep pushing Warren for answers, or is it too late for him to redeem himself? How will this confrontation affect the rest of the mission? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The grip on Warren's arm tightened as Liz's pulse raced. Her mind was a blur of anger, disbelief, and frustration. She had trusted this man with her life, and now, standing in front of her, was the same person who had betrayed her without a second thought. His actions were unforgivable, but the worst part? He had justified it in his mind, convinced himself that he was doing what was necessary, and that made it all the more dangerous. "You're not getting away with this," Liz hissed, twisting his arm slightly to emphasize the point. Warren grunted in pain but didn't flinch. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy lying to you? I didn't ask for this, Liz. But now it's too late." Liz's mind raced. She had trusted him, believed in his every word. They'd been through thick and thin together, fighting side by side, and now, here they were, facing off. She could barely comprehend the betrayal. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "You didn't have to do this," Liz said, her voice steady but full of venom. "You didn't have to be part of this. You chose this. All of this. And now you expect me to just forgive you?" Warren's eyes, usually calm and composed, now showed the faintest flicker of regret. But there was no turning back. He had made his choice. "You don't understand," he said, his voice quieter now, as if trying to reason with her. "This isn't just about you and me. It's bigger than both of us. These people you're up against, they don't just have power, Liz. They have influence everywhere. I thought I could protect you, but the deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes." Liz's grip tightened, but she couldn't ignore the doubt creeping into her thoughts. Could he be telling the truth? Was she really in over her head? "The deeper I go?" Liz scoffed. "I don't need you to protect me, Warren. I've survived worse than this, and I'll survive what comes next, with or without you." Warren looked at her, a strange sadness filling his eyes. "I always knew you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. But there's a difference between strength and survival. These people will make you wish you hadn't gotten involved. They won't stop until they have everything back. And I'll be damned if I let you get caught in their web." For a moment, Liz felt a pang of doubt, but she pushed it away. She couldn't afford to let his words shake her resolve. She had come too far. She couldn't turn back now, not after everything. "I'm not afraid of them," Liz said, her voice low but firm. "I've been to hell and back. I've seen the worst of what they can do, and I'm still here. If anything, that makes me more dangerous than they'll ever be." Warren's gaze softened, and he gave a small, rueful smile. "That's why I couldn't let you go any further. I thought I could keep you safe. But now I realize, maybe I should have just let you walk away." Liz took a deep breath, releasing her hold on his arm. She could feel the weight of the moment, the immense pressure of the decisions they both had to make. There was no going back from this, no second chance. "We're not done here, Warren," Liz said, her voice sharp. "I need answers. Why did you betray me? Why did you turn on me and the others? What are you really a part of?" Warren looked away for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke. "There are things you don't know, things I can't explain. You're not ready to hear the truth." Liz took a step closer. "Then make me ready. I deserve to know the truth. I've given everything for this mission, and now I need to understand why I was dragged into this mess." For a long moment, Warren said nothing. But then, he began to speak in a low, gravelly voice. "It's not what you think, Liz. The files you have, everything you've been chasing, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The real enemy, the ones who have been pulling the strings, they're not just after power. They're after something much bigger. And they've been watching you for a long time." Liz's mind raced as the implications of his words settled in. "What do you mean, they've been watching me? Why?" Warren hesitated, looking as if he was about to say something, but then he stopped. He glanced at the door, his eyes darting nervously. Liz didn't miss the sudden shift in his demeanor. "They know you're here, Liz," he said quickly, "and they won't wait much longer to deal with you. The people I work for, they're ruthless. If you don't leave now, you're going to die." Liz's stomach churned, but she refused to let fear take hold. She had come this far. She wasn't going to turn back now. Then it's time to end this, she said, her voice steely with resolve. You either help me take them down, or you're in my way. Which is it, Warren? He looked at her for a long time, as if weighing the decision. And for the first time since she had walked into the room, Liz saw something like resolve in his eyes. I'm not going to help you, Liz, Warren said softly, but I'm not going to stop you either. There was a brief silence as Liz processed his words. She had no illusions that he was going to help her any further. But she couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything. She turned to the others, who had been standing silently in the background, waiting for her move. Luke and Steve exchanged glances, but it was clear they were ready. The mission was still on, and they had a job to finish. Let's go, Liz said firmly. We've got work to do. As they moved out of the room, Liz couldn't help but feel the weight of everything crashing down on her. The lines between friend and foe had blurred, and the stakes were higher than ever. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to stop until the truth came to light, no matter the cost. Do you think Liz made the right choice confronting Warren? Or should she have walked away? Do you trust him when he says she's in danger? Or do you think he's trying to manipulate her? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the hallway, sending a shiver of unease through Liz. Warren's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They knew they had little time left before the people behind this web of lies would descend upon them. Liz had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm in the face of danger, but now, even her seasoned instincts were on high alert. We need to move. Now, Liz said, her voice clipped and firm. Luke and Steve nodded in agreement, already on edge. The woman, whose name was still a mystery to Liz, had moved to the door, peering out cautiously, her eyes scanning the empty hallway. She gave a quick nod, signaling the all-clear. Liz didn't waste another moment. She turned to Warren, still standing by the door, his face etched with regret. He didn't speak as she moved past him, but his eyes followed her, filled with an emotion she couldn't place. We're getting out of here, Liz said without looking back. I know, Warren replied quietly, but where will you go? Liz didn't answer immediately. The truth was, she didn't know. Every lead they had was a dead end, and now, they had more enemies than ever before. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. They had to get out of the complex first. The rest could come later. First things first, we need to get off this property and disappear, Liz said. Then, we figure out what's next. Warren stepped aside, letting the team pass. You're going to need a distraction, he said, his voice almost resigned. You can't just walk out the front door without them noticing. Liz stopped at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. What do you mean? I'll create a diversion, he said. It'll give you a few minutes, just enough to get away. But you need to move fast. Liz didn't like the idea of relying on Warren. He had already proven himself untrustworthy. But she didn't have time for a better plan. She nodded curtly. All right, but this better not be another one of your tricks, she warned, her eyes narrowing. Warren didn't respond, only gave a slight nod before turning to the computer console near the wall. Liz watched as he quickly punched in a series of commands, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The sound of machines whirring to life filled the air, followed by the hiss of steam and the grinding noise of a massive metal door opening somewhere deeper in the facility. Go, Warren said, his voice urgent. Now. Liz wasted no time. She motioned for Luke and Steve to follow her, and they sprinted down the hallway, keeping low to avoid detection. The woman stayed close behind, her sharp eyes scanning every corner. They reached a narrow exit at the far end of the complex, hidden behind a stack of crates. Liz glanced back one last time to see Warren at the console, his face focused as he continued to work. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped into the night air. The cool wind hit her face, a welcome relief after the oppressive heat of the building. But there was no time to relax. The night was far from over, and they were far from safe. Where to? Steve asked, his voice tense. Liz scanned their surroundings. They were in an industrial area, surrounded by rusted machines and abandoned warehouses. The streets were empty, but Liz knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She could feel the eyes of their enemies already on them. Take the alley, Liz said. We'll cut through the back streets and get to the safe house. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows as they navigated through the maze of buildings. The woman led the way, her movements smooth and efficient. Liz kept her head down, focusing on the task at hand. There was no room for mistakes now. As they turned a corner, Liz heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. Her heart skipped a beat. "We're being followed," she muttered, barely above a whisper. Luke glanced over his shoulder, his hand resting on his weapon. "It's not just one. There's a group of them." Liz cursed under her breath. They hadn't made it far enough yet. She glanced at the woman, who seemed unfazed by the news. "Can you get us out of this?" Liz asked, her voice low but urgent. The woman nodded, already pulling out a small device from her pocket. "I'll slow them down. You just get to the safe house." Without another word, she pressed a button on the device, and a burst of bright light filled the alleyway. Liz had no idea what it was, but it worked. The group of men chasing them froze for a moment, disoriented by the sudden flash. "Go," the woman ordered, turning back to face the men. "I'll hold them off." Liz didn't hesitate. She grabbed Luke's arm and pulled him along, pushing Steve forward as they dashed toward the safe house. Their pace quickened, and the pounding of footsteps behind them seemed to fade. But Liz didn't dare look back. She had to trust that the woman would be able to delay their pursuers long enough for them to escape. They reached the back door of the safe house and slipped inside. Liz slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a heavy metal bolt. Her breathing was labored, but the immediate danger had passed, for now. As they moved into the dimly lit interior of the safe house, Liz's mind was racing. They had made it out, but they weren't out of danger. Not by a long shot. She turned to Luke and Steve, who were both scanning the room, clearly on edge. "We're safe for now," Liz said, but even as she spoke the words, she knew better. The storm was far from over. "We need to regroup," Luke said, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. "Figure out our next move." Liz nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Warren had betrayed her, but he had given her the tools to survive. He had created a diversion, but what else was he hiding? And why had he warned her about the people behind this whole operation? The questions were piling up faster than she could answer them. One thing was clear. This was just the beginning. What do you think Liz should do next? Should she trust the mysterious woman who helped them escape, or does she have her own agenda? And what role do you think Warren will play going forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The safe house was eerily silent, the only sound the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Liz paced back and forth, her mind churning over everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Warren's betrayal still stung, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized he wasn't the only one to blame. Whoever had orchestrated this entire operation had been playing a long game, and it was only just beginning to unfold. "We need a plan," Liz said, her voice breaking the silence. She turned to Luke and Steve, both of whom had been waiting quietly, their faces grim. "Agreed," Steve replied, his hand resting on the table. "But right now, we're as exposed as we've ever been. We need to figure out who's really behind all of this." Liz nodded, her eyes narrowing. "The more I think about it, the more it feels like someone's been pulling our strings this whole time. Warren was just a pawn, just like the rest of us." Luke, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "That's exactly what worries me. If we're all just pieces in their game, we might not even know who to trust anymore." Liz's heart sank at the thought. Trust had always been the cornerstone of her relationships, especially with those she fought beside. But now, everything was up in the air. She couldn't afford to let paranoia consume her, but the reality was too clear. Someone had to be feeding information to their enemies. The question was, who? "You're right," Liz said. "But the question is, who can we trust? Who's really on our side?" At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Liz's hand went to her gun instinctively, her eyes darting to the others. They hadn't expected anyone. Not this soon. She motioned for Luke and Steve to stay low as she approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, Liz exhaled in relief. It was the woman who had helped them escape earlier. She opened the door quickly, ushering her in. "You're late," Liz said, trying to sound casual despite the tension in her voice. The woman gave her a slight smirk. You've been busy. I had to make sure you weren't followed. Did you? The woman glanced behind her, her eyes scanning the empty street outside before she nodded. For now, yes. But there's no time to waste. We've got a bigger problem. Liz stepped back, letting her inside. What's going on? The woman wasted no time, pulling a small tablet from her bag and sliding it across the table to Liz. This is a list of the people involved in your mission, she said. And the ones you thought were on your side? Not so much. Liz hesitated before picking it up. The screen lit up with names, some familiar, some not. The first name that caught her attention was one she had hoped would never show up. Captain Warren, Liz murmured, her heart sinking. I told you. He's not what you think, the woman replied, her voice low. But you're not the only one. Liz scanned the list more closely. There were several other names she recognized. People she had worked with, fought alongside. Her stomach churned as she realized how deeply the conspiracy ran. She felt like she was standing in the middle of a web, and the threads were closing in around her. This is impossible, Steve said, his voice tinged with disbelief. You're saying they've infiltrated the entire operation? The woman nodded. Every level. They've been watching you from the beginning. And now, they know you're onto them. The implications hit Liz like a punch to the gut. They were out of time. They had been exposed, and whoever was behind this operation wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. We need to move fast, Liz said, her voice cold and calculated. Where do we go from here? The woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's only one place left, an old safe house I've used before. It's deep in the mountains, off the grid. It's our best shot at staying hidden. Liz didn't hesitate. We leave now. As they gathered their things, Liz felt a nagging sense of urgency. There were still so many unknowns. They didn't know who was pulling the strings, but they knew one thing for certain. Whoever it was had eyes everywhere. They had to stay one step ahead, or they'd be dead. As they moved out, Liz's thoughts kept drifting back to the names on the list. If Warren was a part of this, then how deep did the betrayal go? Was anyone she had trusted truly who they seemed? They made their way to the garage, where they piled into an old van that would take them to the mountains. Liz sat in the front seat, her fingers tight on the steering wheel. The weight of the situation pressed down on her like a heavy fog. Every decision, every move they made from here on out could mean life or death. She glanced over at Luke, who was checking his weapons. Do you think we can trust her? Liz asked quietly, her eyes lingering on the woman in the back seat. Luke paused for a moment before responding. I don't know, but right now, she's the only one helping us. I think she's got her own reasons for being here. Liz nodded slowly, but the doubt in her mind still lingered. They had no choice but to trust her for now. They had no other options. As the van rumbled to life and pulled out into the night, Liz's thoughts raced. The web was tightening. The enemy was closing in. But no matter how deep the conspiracy went, Liz knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. What do you think Liz should do now? Should she continue to trust the mysterious woman, or should she be more cautious? How deep do you think the conspiracy goes? Let us know what you think in the comments. The van bounced along the rough mountain road, its tires crunching over gravel and dirt. Liz kept her eyes fixed on the winding path ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The night air was cold, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of trees brushing against the van's side. The mountains around them were dark and imposing, but they felt like the safest place they could be at the moment. For now, they were safe. But Liz couldn't shake the feeling that the moment they stepped into the safe house, everything would change. So, what exactly is this place? Luke asked from the back seat, breaking the silence. It's a backup, the woman said, her eyes flicking between Liz and the road ahead. I've used it a few times in the past when things got too hot. It's off the grid, isolated. No one will find us unless they know exactly where to look. Liz didn't respond, her mind whirling. The idea of being alone in the mountains, with only a handful of allies, didn't sit well with her. It felt too much like being trapped. What happens when we get there? Steve asked, his voice laced with concern. We regroup. Lay low, the woman said. But we need to figure out what's going on with this list and fast. They're not going to stop looking for you. Liz's gut tightened at the thought. She had a feeling their enemies weren't just looking for her. They were hunting her. And if they were willing to go this far, they wouldn't stop until they had everything they wanted. As they drove, Liz couldn't help but wonder if the woman truly was on their side. She had helped them escape the compound, sure, but what if she had her own agenda? What if she was playing them, just like everyone else? "What's your name, by the way?" Liz asked, her tone casual but sharp. It had been nagging her for a while that she still didn't know the woman's real identity. The woman hesitated for a moment before answering. "I go by Raven. That's all you need to know." Liz nodded, filing away the information. It was a strange name, but it wasn't the time for questions. Right now, they needed answers, and they needed them fast. After what felt like hours, the van finally turned off the main road and onto a smaller, even rougher trail. The trees were dense here, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The path ahead was barely visible, but Raven seemed to know it well, directing Liz with small, sharp movements. "Just a little further," Raven said, her voice low. "Stay sharp. We're not out of the woods yet." Liz's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but she saw nothing but darkness. The silence in the van was deafening, broken only by the crunching of the gravel under the tires. Finally, they reached the safe house, a modest cabin tucked away at the foot of a cliff, its windows dark and uninviting. Liz parked the van and killed the engine, her eyes scanning the surroundings as the rest of the team piled out. "This is it," Raven said, her voice oddly final. Liz stepped out of the van, the cool night air biting at her skin. She glanced up at the steep cliffs above them, the dense woods surrounding the cabin like an impenetrable wall. It was isolated, remote, exactly what they needed to hide. But even as she took in the surroundings, Liz's instinct screamed at her that something wasn't right. The sound of a twig snapping underfoot echoed in the distance. Liz froze, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. Did anyone else hear that? Luke's eyes narrowed, scanning the dark woods. "Yeah, I heard it too." The woman, Raven, raised a hand, signaling for them to stay quiet. She moved quickly, crouching low to the ground as she approached the cabin. Liz and the others followed suit, staying close behind. "Stay alert," Raven whispered. "We've got company." Liz's pulse quickened. She had known they wouldn't get a moment's peace, but she hadn't expected the danger to come so soon. They moved toward the back of the cabin, using the shadows for cover. As they neared the edge of the structure, Liz caught a glimpse of movement, figures lurking just beyond the tree line. At least 5 of them, all heavily armed. "They're here," Liz muttered, "and they're not wasting any time." Raven nodded, her face hard. "We need to get inside. Now." They bolted for the back door, Raven leading the way. Liz kicked it open, and they rushed inside, slamming it shut behind them. Liz didn't wait to catch her breath. She moved quickly through the dark cabin, her mind racing as she searched for anything that could give them an edge. Luke and Steve were already checking the windows, making sure there were no gaps in their defenses. Raven was at the door, her fingers working fast to secure it. "They're closing in," Raven said. "But they won't come in unless they're sure we're inside." "How long do we have?" Liz asked, her voice tight. "Not long," Raven replied. "We need to figure out how to escape before they force their way in. They won't stop coming." Liz's mind raced. They were trapped, surrounded by enemies, and every move they made was being watched. They couldn't afford another mistake. "All right," Liz said, taking a deep breath. "We need to set a trap. Lead them into the woods. Make them think we're trying to escape. Then, we turn the tables." Raven raised an eyebrow. "You have something in mind?" Liz smirked. "I always do." The tension in the room was palpable as they quickly began setting their plan into motion. Liz wasn't sure how long they had before the enemy would break in, but she knew one thing. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when they were so close to the answers they needed. As they worked, Liz's thoughts once again turned to Warren and the list of names. Someone inside had to be feeding information to the enemy, and she wasn't sure who she could trust. The walls were closing in, but Liz wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Not ever. Do you think Liz's plan to lure their enemies into the woods will work, or is it too risky? And who do you think might be the mole inside their group? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The cabin was still, the silence unbearable. Liz paced back and forth, her boots making soft thuds against the wooden floor. Outside, the night was darker than ever, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The sound of the wind rustling the trees was the only thing that kept her grounded in the present. The trap was set. The decoys were in place. But Liz couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had been in countless situations like this before, but something about tonight felt different, more dangerous, more personal. All right, everyone knows their part? Liz asked, turning to Luke, Steve, and Raven, who were all standing by, ready for the next move. Yeah, Luke replied, his voice calm but tense. We lead them into the woods, make them think we're escaping, and then we turn the tables. We've got one shot at this. Steve, who had been sharpening his knife, looked up. Let's hope it works. We don't have the luxury of time. Raven, standing by the back door, nodded. Once we're out there, we stick to the plan. No deviation. Liz took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always been the one to make the tough calls, the one to put her team in the line of fire when it was necessary. But tonight, she wasn't just leading them into battle. She was leading them into a fight for survival. They had no idea who was pulling the strings on the other side. They didn't know if there was a mole among them. And worse, they had no idea how far the enemy had infiltrated. We don't get another chance, Liz said, meeting each of their eyes. If we don't make this work, we're done. They nodded in unison. Liz's heart was pounding as she moved toward the back door, pushing it open just a crack to peer out. The woods beyond were pitch black, and she couldn't see a thing. Her instincts told her to stay alert, to trust the feeling that something was about to go wrong. We're good to go, Raven whispered. They're coming. A chill ran down Liz's spine as she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the woods. The enemy was closing in, getting closer with each passing second. Liz's eyes flicked to the others. This was it. There was no turning back. They slipped out into the night, moving quietly through the trees, the shadows swallowing them whole. Liz felt the familiar weight of her weapon in her hand, her senses on high alert. She could hear the enemy's voices, low and hushed, as they stalked closer, unaware of the trap that awaited them. As they reached the edge of the woods, Liz took a deep breath, signaling to the others to stop. They huddled behind a large boulder, eyes fixed on the approaching figures in the distance. The plan was simple. Make the enemy think they were escaping, only to lead them into a kill zone where they would be ambushed. The figures in the distance were getting closer. Liz motioned to Luke, who gave a small nod, then to Steve, who shifted into position. They were ready. Now, Liz muttered. They split off in different directions, moving quickly but quietly. Liz moved toward a small clearing ahead, kicking up leaves to create the illusion of someone running through the underbrush. The goal was to get the enemy to follow her into the trap. Minutes passed like hours as Liz heard the sounds of movement closing in. Her heart raced. Each step she took felt like it could be her last. She could hear their voices now, murmuring in the darkness as they followed the trail she had left. She glanced over her shoulder, making sure Luke and Steve were in position. She had done this before. She knew how to stay calm under pressure. And then, just as the first enemy soldier stepped into the clearing, Liz whipped around, aiming her gun straight at him. "Freeze!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. The soldier froze, his eyes widening in surprise. But Liz didn't hesitate. She fired, hitting him square in the chest. He fell to the ground with a sickening thud. The others didn't have time to react before Luke and Steve emerged from their positions, guns raised, taking out 2 more soldiers in quick succession. The last one barely had time to pull his weapon before Raven appeared from the shadows, tackling him to the ground and knocking the gun from his hands. But as the last enemy soldier hit the ground, Liz heard the unmistakable sound of more footsteps, this time louder, faster. "Ambush!" she muttered under her breath. Suddenly, the woods erupted in chaos. More figures emerged from the darkness, at least a dozen of them, armed and ready for a fight. Liz's heart raced as the odds quickly shifted. They had been outnumbered from the start, But now it was clear that the enemy had anticipated their every move. "Fall back," Liz shouted. "Get to the cabin." They turned and ran, but the enemy was closing in fast, and the sound of gunfire rang out from behind them. Liz's adrenaline surged as she sprinted toward the cabin, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were running out of time. They were running out of options. Just as they reached the edge of the woods, the enemy opened fire, the sound of bullets whizzing by filling the air. Liz dove for cover behind a tree, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "Keep moving," she shouted to the others, her voice strained. "We can't stop now." But as they sprinted for the cabin, Liz realized they were being herded into a corner. The woods were their cover, but they were also their prison. The enemy knew exactly where they were. They reached the cabin, bursting through the back door, hearts pounding. The door slammed shut behind them with a crash. "We need to hold them off," Liz said, her voice low but firm. "This is it. The final stand." The team quickly moved into position, barricading the doors and windows as best they could. Liz could feel the weight of their situation sinking in. They had been outmaneuvered, and now they had nowhere to run. She glanced at the others. "We fight. We survive. We win." And then, as the first sound of gunfire echoed through the night, Liz knew this would be the fight of their lives. What do you think Liz's team should do next? Is there a way to turn the tables on the enemy, or are they cornered for good? And who is the real mastermind behind this trap? Let us know your thoughts. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night, relentless and deafening. Liz's heart raced, each beat feeling like it could be her last. The team had made it inside the cabin, but the fight was far from over. The enemy was closing in from all sides, and there was nowhere to run. They had one final chance to survive, and Liz was determined to make it count. "We need to hold them off for as long as we can," Liz said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She had been in tight spots before, but nothing like this. There was no more room for mistakes. Luke, Steve, and Raven nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They knew the stakes, and they knew what they had to do. "Let's make it count," Raven said, pulling a heavy rifle from behind the couch and positioning herself near the window. The rest of them spread out, taking cover behind furniture and barricades. Liz stood by the back door, her gun in hand, eyes scanning the dark woods through the narrow cracks of the cabin's shuttered windows. The enemy was close now, too close. Liz could hear the sound of footsteps on the ground, the crunch of leaves underfoot. They were being surrounded, and there wasn't much time left. "I'm going to check the back," Steve said, motioning to the rear of the cabin. He moved quickly, his hand on his sidearm, every muscle in his body tensed for action. "Be careful," Liz warned. "We don't know where they are." As Steve disappeared into the darkness, Liz felt a surge of dread. She had to trust that he could handle himself, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. The enemy had their positions. They had the numbers. It would only be a matter of time before they breached the cabin. "I can hear them," Raven said, her voice low but urgent. "They're coming up on the left." Liz nodded, signaling for Luke to take position by the front window. "Get ready. We can't let them inside." The sound of gunfire exploded from outside. The enemy was opening fire. Liz dove for cover, her body hitting the ground with a thud. The cabin shook with the force of the shots. She knew they needed to act fast before the enemy overwhelmed them. "They're coming in," Luke shouted from the front. "I count at least 10. "Damn it," Liz muttered. She turned to Raven, who was already reloading her weapon. "Take the left flank. I'll handle the right." Without waiting for a response, Liz moved toward the back door, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had one shot at this. If they were going to survive, they needed to take the fight to the enemy. Raven's voice came through her earpiece. "I'm moving in. I've got 2 targets on the left." Liz didn't have time to respond. The back door slammed open, and a figure stepped inside. A soldier, his rifle aimed directly at her. Without hesitation, Liz fired, hitting him in the chest. He crumpled to the floor in a heap. But there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers were right behind him. "On your 6, Raven shouted. Liz dove to the side, narrowly avoiding another burst of gunfire. Her heart was racing, her body moving on instinct as she fired again. taking out another soldier. But they were relentless. More of them flooded in through the back door. The cabin was alive with the chaos of battle. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, shattering windows and sending splinters flying. Liz's focus was razor-sharp as she kept firing, moving, dodging. She couldn't afford to miss. Not now. Look, Steve, get to the back. We need to make a stand. Liz yelled. They were fighting for their lives now. But Liz wasn't going down without a fight. As the fight raged on, Liz caught a glimpse of something in the distance. Movement, a figure standing just outside the trees. She narrowed her eyes, her gut telling her that something wasn't right. Raven, Liz said, her voice tight, there's someone outside. Be ready. Raven shifted her aim, scanning the tree line. There was a sudden flash, a burst of gunfire from the trees. Raven's shot went wide as the figure retreated back into the shadows. They're trying to flank us, Raven said, gritting her teeth. We need to act fast. We don't have much time, Liz said, her mind racing. I have an idea. We need to lead them into the open, away from the cabin. Luke and Steve moved quickly, setting up a distraction near the front of the cabin. Liz and Raven positioned themselves near the rear, watching as the enemy continued to advance, unaware of the trap they were walking into. With a signal from Liz, Luke fired a shot into the air, drawing the enemy's attention. The soldiers surged forward, taking the bait, moving toward the front of the cabin. Now, it was Liz's turn. Let's move, she shouted. She and Raven rushed out the back door, moving quickly through the trees, taking cover as they approached the enemy's flank. Liz's heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her focus. This was it, the moment they either won or lost. They emerged from the woods behind the enemy soldiers, weapons drawn. Liz's first shot hit a soldier square in the back, sending him tumbling to the ground. Raven opened fire immediately after, taking out another soldier with a quick, precise shot. The remaining soldiers spun around, caught off guard by the ambush. Chaos erupted as they tried to regroup, but Liz and her team were already in motion, their training kicking in as they systematically took out their targets. The fight was brutal, fast-paced, and relentless. Liz could hear her team's voices through the chaos, their determination pushing them forward, but she knew they were running out of time. The enemy wasn't just a group of soldiers. They were part of something much bigger. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was about taking down the entire network that had been hunting them. With one final push, Liz fired her last round, taking down the last enemy soldier. The woods fell silent, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. Liz stood, panting, her body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. The cabin was still standing. They had survived. We did it, Raven said, breathless. We actually did it. Liz nodded, but her mind was already racing. We may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. She glanced at her team. They were battered, bloodied, but alive. And for now, that was enough. What do you think will happen next for Liz and her team? With their enemies defeated, do they now have the upper hand? Or is the real battle still ahead? Let us know your thoughts on the finale.